Welcome back to Bulletproof Mindset, your go-to podcast for health, fitness and entertainment. Today, I welcome Colin Campbell on the show, who is the podcast host of Campbell Conversations, sales director, sales guru, does some sales mastery and goes to businesses and talks to their teams about how to improve their communication skills and much, much more. One of the reasons I wanted to sit down with Colin was there's a lot of talk around exiting the 9 to 5 and living this dream Instagram life on running your own business and being an entrepreneur. Now, although Colin has different avenues of what he does, he has seen massive amounts of success on nailing the 9 to 5 and climbing through the corporate ladder, so to speak. As always, this was a fascinating conversation. It was great to sit and catch up with Colin, hear his story, and more importantly, communicate how effective you can be in a 9 to 5 role. Instagram sort of glorifies this life of being an entrepreneur, being a business owner, and often the corporate world tends to get a bad rap, but Colin is an excellent example of how you can actually excel in the 9 to 5 world and live a very successful life. Colin speaks about the mindset, the attributes and the characteristics of what it takes to really thrive in that 9 to 5 world, so I'm sure you're going to enjoy that. Now, as you can see, this is a long episode, so I won't speak much more, but two things I want to mention. One thing, if you're new around here and you want to support the show, one of the best ways you can do that is by leaving a 5-star rating on Spotify, Apple Music, or subscribing to us on YouTube. Leave a comment on what you thought of today's episode. And as always, to find Colin's details, check the links below this video. He does some sales mastery coaching on a one-to-one basis. So if you're interested in any of that, check the link out below. And without further ado, enjoy today's episode. You're down in London then next week. What's it like when you're doing like 10 podcasts back to back?
It'll be 4 back to back.
4? And
that'll be the most I've done in a day back to back. I've done 3 in a day before, but there was 1 remote in the morning and then I did 2 in the studio in the afternoon.
That callus is built up, man.
I think 4 between 10 and 2 p.m. is going to be a lot, but they're going to be shorter pods. They're going to be like 45 minutes to an hour.
Okay. Yeah.
And that's 1, a timing thing because I'm in London for a set period, and 2, an affordability thing. The cost of studios down there for the quality, see, compared to what you're producing here with this, the cost is higher and it's of a lesser quality. That's unfair. The studio I'm going to this time around is much better. One I've used before in London. Yeah. It's just really
They
disappointing.
always seem to have good quality equipment, but for whatever reason, there's like a breakdown on how the files are sent and all that sort of stuff.
Definitely. Because I sat on one on a sofa and I looked around and it all looked good. And then the output of it, all the clips were nowhere near what I get from here, what I get from the green room, what I get from the studios I use in abroad. Disappointing.
So you just done your Dubai run as well. How was that? So you seem to be moving closer and closer, I feel like, to
moving
living life out there.
I say this to a lot of my friends and anyone that will listen, I suppose. Between November and March, there's nowhere I'd rather be.
Oh, really?
Because the weather's so good and the weather here is obviously poor. And a lot of people, whether they live there or they're going through there during that period because of the attraction of it being winter there, you're just in a great environment. It's amazing for the podcast. It's amazing for my lifestyle in terms of training, nutrition, socially as well. But outside of that period, between say April to September, October, I really like living in Scotland. Like I've built a really nice lifestyle where I've got a nice flat that I live in. I've got a good friend group. I've got the podcast and the network that brings, which I'm sure we can speak about as we go on today. But during those winter months, it's an incredible place to be. And then, of course, there's the draw of the tax. The network's even better as well because you're filtering for outliers in a city of outliers. So you're like connecting with the most inspiring people. Like one of the guys we spoke to, Colin, moved out 10 years ago from Edinburgh, had been working in a couple of different like mid-level property management roles, moved out there as a real estate broker, and now has the 3rd biggest real estate brokerage in Dubai.
Yeah, I'm not listening to the podcast, but from the clips,
he's built different. Honestly,
insane,
really inspiring, and that is what's possible out there.
Yeah, is it getting diluted? This is from what I see. This is the Instagram life. Like you see everyone kind of making the move, and ironically, some of these people making the move to come back and sharing their stories. Everyone's got their biases. What would you say to that?
The population is growing 8% a year there,
right?
And it's mostly people who are fiscally scaling or attempting to fiscally scale that are going. So they are filtering for that. Do I think it's getting saturated? I think there's a long way to go. As long as it keeps its strictness, or the level of strictness it's got just now. It's kind of that perfect balance between it's got some elements of Western values, but it's still got their kind of strict civil Islamic law, not Sharia law. Big difference. And as long as it maintains that, it will still be an amazing place to go. If it waters it down, it lets in every Tom, Dick and Harry who maybe want to wheel deal and behave badly out there, then it will lose a lot of its charm.
They haven't gambling and that's not out there yet.
They had permissions given for casinos.
Yeah.
There was one that was meant to be at a place called Blue Water that got scrapped, and I think there's a lot of Russians there post the Ukraine conflict. 2022 and 2023 was the most Russian property purchases anywhere in the world was in Dubai.
Interesting.
Because they were fleeing from the sanctions, and Dubai and the UAE were pretty open to it. They stay quite apolitical. They never get involved in the Gaza situation either. Never get involved in the Ukraine situation. They're very like ambivalent to it. If you come from whatever country you come from, as long as you've got money and you're self-sufficient, they're happy to have you.
Yeah. So we'll see where you end up. So before we see where you end up, let's see where you came from. So this has been a long time coming. Obviously, I've been on your podcast, and we met just over a year ago. Was that a year and a half ago? And I remember when I started podcasting, I want to tell you that story because it's just, I don't know, it's how we're wired as Scottish people. We started podcasting, and I was like, right, nobody's really podcasting in the game because you're naive. And you start doing them, and then clips of other fellow Glasgow creators came up, and you came up, and I was like, who's this guy? So he's not going to be a real podcaster, and here we are a couple of years later, and you still hustling away and all that sort of stuff. And it's good to actually meet you last year and actually realise this is probably one of the biggest lessons I've realised as a just as a person, I guess. Like, you can be very judgmental and out front until you meet everyone, and that's something that I've tried to be better at doing, particularly over like 2 years ago, like not casting judgment just from a couple of social media clips and all that sort of thing. So for those listening who don't know you, how do you what would you describe yourself as? I know that's like the go-to podcast move, and it probably changes every time you're asked that question.
It depends what show I'm on, or depends who's asking. Yeah, I would describe myself as somebody that is pursuing his best version across all the areas that applies himself. One of the cheesy phrases I used to use back in the day was the office athlete. And that related to me trying to perform at my absolute best in my day job, my 9 to 5 in the sales world, and outside of that athletically. But I think that's developed to have like a third or a fourth strand in terms of like my relationships, my mindset,
legs,
everything's just kind of kicked on. So I would say like self-development is a maybe an overused term, but probably because we're in an echo chamber that talk about it. So for those that are newly acquainted with me, I'm somebody that's pursuing self-development across the many areas and the kind of main pillars of my life that I truly, truly care about. And I really do practice what I preach. And it's funny you bring up that kind of competitive nature when you see somebody else podcast. I think maybe not in Scotland entirely, because there's still people that are quite disparaging about what it is that I've been doing, but I've tried to be extremely abundant.
Yeah.
Whether that's been trying to put other people on to have guests on. So I did a lot of collaborations with Fergus Crawley when we were both podcasting. Fergus is kind of not doing as much now. David McIntosh, who is the development by David, but it's now rebranded as Origin Story. I've like referred guests. We've bounced guests back and forth. When you asked me a couple of questions right near the start, I was encouraging you. I was like, mate, it's going to be the best thing you ever do. Let's go. That's got to be the mindset for more of the things that we do in life. I just think there's a natural human disposition to be like, oh, I wonder, like, what's he like?
It's a test of good character as well, though, and that's one thing that stood out when I first met you. I think maybe here's a question for you, like, that you get this all the time. Like, you're very well polished, well spoken. This is what you've developed in your skills throughout the years. People ever ask you if you're an android or a robot for like how well polished and well spoken you are?
The first time I ever really noticed that I was able to speak down a camera really well, even compared to other people that sometimes do it a lot, was I did a shoot for a brand called Hustle in 2019 in London at a gym, and we were doing workouts and walking through the workout. But I think we had 3 videos each to shoot, and one of them was like, how do you fit fitness into your busy lifestyle? And one of them was talking through some sort of like stretching routine. And I did one take for both of those. And the other creators that were there in the day, one of them was this girl with this, she had a big YouTube channel actually, and a big Instagram, and she was like hating doing it. And I remember being like, oh, well, it's quite easy. Like, you just remember what you had to say, and then when you're saying it, you just speak and speak, and you just speak through it slowly and clearly and try and pace it. But I had practice at speaking under pressure through my day job since 2014, whether that was on the phone to customers for the first time, cold calling them, whether that was giving a presentation to a group of landlords, whether that was running a Zoom meeting to the internal company or to a group of external people that you're pitching to. So I guess I'd had practice that makes me sound a bit more fluent and a bit more able to do it. There's an element of natural talent or natural predisposition to being good at it, but years and years and years of reps that mean that when I show up now, and we'll maybe do some ad reads after we finish, we're speaking about, I hope to be able to do those to a level that is really, really good. I'm a big believer if you're going to do something, do it well. And I decided that communication and how I carry myself was going to be one of those things.
Yeah. So let's unpack that. Let's kind of go back to like growing up as a kid and all that sort of thing. So the household that you grew up in, you've got another brother. Any other siblings?
No, just the two of us.
What was the house like growing up? Was the competitive nature between the two of you, or was mum and dad like, were they egging you on?
Yeah, so Ian and I grew up in Bearsden. Again, that's maybe where the accent comes from as well, which people sometimes pick up on. But I don't have a Glasgow Uni accent. I actually just have this my accent.
To a Glasgow Uni accent.
It's just my accent, yeah. And I did go to Glasgow Uni, and we'll talk about that, I'm sure. But yeah, Ian and I grew up in Bearsden. I was born in 1992, and Ian was born 2.5 years later, so really close in age. And we came from a typical nuclear family. I think it's very difficult to have this nowadays, but dad was the breadwinner and had his own company and his own business, and mum, after my brother was born, she stopped working at the BBC and raised the two of us as a homemaker or a housewife, whatever term you want to use. But that was the model that we had. Dad is the provider, mum is the supporter, and we played every sport possible and imaginable because mum could drive us here, there, everywhere, drop us off, and so encouraging for that. The main ones were rugby, a little bit of tennis, but we stopped playing tennis and ended up playing golf. And yes, there was such fierce competition. And from a logistics perspective, it was easier for Ian and I to do the same thing. So it actually meant that he got exposed to loads of stuff at a young age. So I was allowed to go and play golf by myself at 13, I think it was. You were allowed a membership where you could play, but because he was with me, he was coming at like 10. So he was loving that, but it meant that he developed really, really quick for a young guy. So he was great at rugby at a young age, great at golf at a young age, and we used to just battle out to be better against each other. We're incredibly close now. I think many people probably know this if they know me. My brother and I live together. We own a flat together in Bearsden. So that didn't cause any issues, but we used to fight like cat and dog as well because he was really good for his age and I was average for my age. So there was a level of like, oh, he might be able to beat me at something. So there was you would clap it, and you can never let your little brother win, can you?
So what was it your dad done?
So dad was a management consultant for a quality assurance management system called ISO 9001. Okay. I won't get into the nitty gritty of that, but effectively he would go into businesses, often hospitals or engineering businesses or manufacturing businesses, and review what their processes they have in place and whether they're compliant with a particular qualification. And then he would run workshops and support off the back of that that would enable that qualification. It's funny, dad's been self-employed since the late 1980s, but very conservative with a small c about what Ian and I would do as well. A big believer in go to university, get the graduate job, have a secure level of income. Like all the stuff that I've done on the side that I'm sure we'll chat more about, he was always like a bit risk adverse to it, which is funny because in sharp contrast, he's been out himself for 30 plus years. I just think parents want the best and safest option for you. And I think we spoke about this on our podcast when your PT was starting to build. Your parents are like, oh, but look what you've done with OpenReach. Like, look how much you've progressed. And you're thinking, yes, but I'm being pulled in another direction now. But parents want what seems the least risky option because they don't want you to come to any harm. Even when you are a 30-year-old man,
it doesn't matter what age. Yeah, it's always going to be that. So what did that look like going into school and that sort of thing? Did you ever? Can you remember like the early years of what you thought you would be doing when you're older, and are you doing it?
That's such a good question. Again, on my mum's side, my grandpa played for Rangers Football Club. And in fact, he was one of the greatest ever goal scorers for them. He played during an era where it was heavily disrupted by World War II. He served in the military, won a military medal in World War II. So he's a huge source of pride and inspiration for the family. But when Grandpa finished playing football, he was both manager at Partick Thistle and Dundee, but then assistant manager at Rangers, but also did some journalism. And it became very apparent when I was younger that football was not going to be the thing for me. The
left feet.
the talent did not get passed down in the slightest, but the journalistic aspect really interested me. And even from a really young age, I remember writing match reports of games that I'd watched on the TV of Rangers playing, or infrequently if Scotland were playing, I would do that as well. And I would do the same for the Scotland rugby team, because rugby was my main sport that we played as kids. That was influenced through dad and our lack of footballing talent as well. And that was always something that I really thought about. I wanted to be a sports journalist, not a journalist for like current affairs or the world, but a sports journalist. And I used to love writing those match reports, and that developed when I was in my mid-teens. I would write the match report for the rugby club men's team when I was still playing underage age groups, and that was something that stayed with me all the time through school. And I was always somebody that liked writing out the report. And funnily enough, I think the modern version of a journalist is probably a podcaster. Look at the influence that Rogan, Lex Friedman, Schultz had on the US election. I really think that nowadays people go to podcasts for their take on events rather than the events themselves. And I don't think we can trust the news as shown by the last few years to some extent.
Mainstream media is sort of gone now. I
don't watch anything. Nothing whatsoever. To the extent that sometimes I'm a bit ignorant of what's happened in the world. Yeah. Did you see that? And I'm like, no, I didn't.
Jill's one that's always saying to me, like massive events that happen that we should all know about. So don't know about it, so I've turned all notifications off. Like, there's something to be said about the fast food that we consume for our brain, and that's often one that comes up in conversation.
Can you believe people have notifications on about the news?
I think
for their phone, to ping on their phone.
And then it becomes a topic of conversation, then it's messing with your emotional regulation and all that sort of stuff. It's like, whoa, chill.
We're definitely going to chat about the like corporate world and stuff like that, but that's the one thing I notice about the people I speak to in the corporate world versus the kind of entrepreneurial people that I've made friends with through the podcast and through my Instagram content. The people in the corporate world are still dictated to by what's happening in the mainstream. Like, so I jumped on a Teams call 2 days ago, and one of the girls on the team's like, "Oh, did you see this is happening?" And I'm like, "No." And then outside of that, on the flip side, none of my friends in like any of the kind of entrepreneurial group chats or any of the Telegram chats that I'm in are talking about anything like that.
Different characteristics, isn't it?
That's right.
There's a lot of similarities, which I would imagine, but that can be good to dive into a little bit more. But backing up a sec with so journalist, and that's like the modern day email in a way. So refining the skill of writing, that must have there's probably a reason why you're good at speaking and good at remembering lines and all that sort of stuff when you had that first promo.
Definitely. I really, really liked the process of watching something and then telling the story of what had happened for people to read. And that experience of writing the match reports for the men's team at West of Scotland was huge for me, because at 15, 16, I would go away on the bus with the men's team to all the different places around the country, and West were doing really well at that point. They had a lot of really good players that went on to play for Scotland, but they had a lot of quote unquote normal guys that had jobs that were just playing at a really high level. And there was the drinking culture, there was the fun culture, there was the lad culture. So I was exposed to that at quite a young age, and that was good for me in some ways, and in other ways I really learned about what it's like to be a man, albeit a kind of a Peter Pan man, because the guys that play rugby, they really do live a bit of a mad life. They live a mad lifestyle.
Where does that self-awareness come from? Was that just developed through those years, or do you feel you were quite self-aware at a young age?
I was quite self-aware that it was a great experience for me. Probably my dad said to me, he was like, "You'll grow up doing this," and I completely agree. And at the end of the game, I would speak to the opposition coach, and I would speak to the head coach of West at the time. It was a guy called John Beattie, who's actually a presenter on BBC Scotland. And I would say, like, "Oh, like, how did the game go today?" In the same way, like, you see, like, BT Sports interviewed the Rangers manager last night, or the Atletico Bilbao manager last night for their reaction. I thought, monkey see, monkey do. So I was like, that's what you should do at the end. So I had to, as a young guy, conduct myself quite well to have those conversations. So I was getting exposure to adult conversations as a young man. And maybe my dad saying something like, "That'll help you grow up." It just self-fulfilling prophecy. Yeah. Self-fulfilling prophecy. But you thought that would happen, and guess what it did.
So hearing that story, you'd think your path would end up into journalism, which I can now understand maybe why you took a turn into politics and that sort of stuff for university. What happens from this point in your life through high school to picking what you choose to do at
Yeah,
university?
that's a great question, and it links to what I was doing with those match reports, because I remember sitting in a press box. Western Scotland were playing Glasgow Hawks. That was the kind of main rivalry.
Okay.
And they put it on a Friday night and they put it down at the stadium at Annie's Land. And there was a reporter there from the Glasgow Herald who was doing it full time. Whereas when I was going to watch at these amateur games, it was mostly just the hack from the other rugby club and maybe somebody from like a local paper. So say we were playing Boroughmuir, it was in Edinburgh, there was somebody from like a local Edinburgh paper. It wasn't like the Edinburgh Herald or whatever the equivalent is. There was a guy called Kevin Ferry. And I said to him, "Oh, Kevin, I've seen you write for years in the Herald about the Scotland rugby team, the Glasgow Warriors. I would love to do this when I'm older. What would you recommend I do as a degree?" And he went, "First things first, do not go and do the journalism degree at Strathclyde University because they're churning out journalists 10 a penny." And he was correct. Instead, go and do a written degree in a subject you're interested in, which will show that you're able to take vast amounts of information, distill it down into an argument and present it, and do your journalism stuff on the side to build up your CV and what's called a portfolio of articles that you've had published. And that rang true to me because I really enjoyed modern studies at school. I had been raised in an environment where we talked about politics at the dinner table. We talked about history. Massively so,
So what did your mum do at the BBC? Was she a reporter of some
No,
sort?
my mum wasn't a reporter. She worked as a functionary within the department. She worked online to one of the Director General, whatever the term was in BBC Scotland. So mum wasn't massively like that, but dad's always been like, genuinely, this is funny, like this is such a Bears Den like, upbringing, but Sunday dinner in the dining room in the family house, we would get asked questions about, like, we would chronologically do the Prime Ministers in order. We would talk about, in World War II, what happened at this battle, what happened at that battle. And it was that's funny. That was just how we spoke of, and how dad sort of reinforced some sort of learnings to us. Because I think a lot gets lost nowadays.
Absolutely.
In British culture and British history. And dad was very keen for us to actually have an understanding of it and not be ignorant.
Yeah.
Now, did that make me much, much better at school? Maybe a little bit, but it probably made me much more of an intelligent person in terms of my understanding of how the world operated. So that was really helpful for me to understand these things. And when you're raised like that, you typically end up falling in those footsteps to some extent. So politics was definitely something, in modern studies at school was something that I had an inkling towards. So when it came to choosing university courses, that conversation with Kevin Ferry and the fact that I liked the subject and was keen to, I enjoyed talking about it, I enjoyed writing about it, meant that when you're going to go and do something at uni, it makes it a bit of an easier choice.
Yeah. But so first things first on that, like, what great advice to get before kind of making the choice of what you want to do. Friends and that, so I guess upbringing plays a massive part in where you're at today and the choices that you made, obviously, going into university. I think a lot of that definitely comes down to the close relationship that sounds like you and your family had, and then also the freedom to go and explore these different parts. What is high school like? Like, because this is one thing I'm a bit conscientious of when I've got kids and they go up, like, doesn't matter how good the parents are, like, we all seen it with different people, and it's like, what the hell, man? Sometimes it just takes, who do you end up going with throughout high school, your friend group, the influences, etc. What was that like for you? I
was definitely quite a shy kid at high school,
right,
and was not in the super cool popular crowd, but was in the sporty crowd because I played rugby and golf to a reasonable level, not brilliant by any stretch of the imagination, but I was in that space. Most of my friends were into rugby and sports as well. I definitely, like I said, I wasn't in the popular crowd. I got a bit of a hard time at high school. Funnily enough, at Bearsden Academy, speaking the way I do, some people were trying to not speak that way. Right. There's almost like a playing up to, like, try and be a bit more hard, a bit more scheme, which is a crazy thing that people would, like, try to lean into when they're not as well, which I think is so inauthentic. Like, how many of our friends that we know through content creation have come from a background where it was really impoverished, and they've been like, I never want to go back to that. Whereas you've got people from a middle class background being like, trying to wear a Lacoste tracksuit and trying to, like, appropriate culture from somebody else. And I got a bit of a hard time for speaking the way that I do, which is again, water off a duck's back at this stage. But I definitely developed more because kind of 15, 16, similar timeline to doing the match reports, I was getting into the gym and I became a lot more confident in how I was shaped and how I looked, because I was a kind of late grower. Like, I mean, I'm only 5'10" now, but I was probably like 5'5", 5'6" until sixth year at school. So what's that, 16, 17?
Yeah.
And there's definitely a pecking order and a hierarchy of who develops first and who has the deeper voice and who has the
who's got abs.
That's right.
And that's where sports play a big part in high school for sure.
That's right.
So that played in your favour a little bit then, just being part of the sports, but then there was a bit...
Towards fifth, sixth year, I really grew into my own, because one, I became more confident in my athletic ability, and I became more confident in how I looked and how I felt, and I was less of the wee guy. I was still like not big, but I'd grown some biceps for the first time. I remember coming back from the gap between fifth year and sixth year. I come back and I dyed my hair blonde for some bizarre reason, like super blonde. I think I'm still suffering from the condition, what I did to it. But dyed my hair blonde. I've been in the gym, and I think I was able to squat 90 kilos now, and I was able to bench like 70 kilos, and I was able to do 10 pull-ups, and I remember being like, whoa, I'm the guy. And I remember my confidence walking around, and we just moved school. So Bearsden Academy had redeveloped a new school just down the road, and we were the first 6 years in it. And I remember I was a prefect, I had a blazer, and I remember giving a tour to like families of the new school, being like, oh, this is like our new art department, this is our new sports pitches and stuff like that. And I remember the confidence that I had doing that being something that was new to me, because previously I was quite shy.
Timid, yeah.
But the overlap between getting into the gym, doing the match reports, and being exposed to men's rugby, and kind of having those conversations where those guys were like, oh, Colin, have a beer with us, like on the bus back from Edinburgh. I'd have like 2 ciders or something like that, and like wouldn't be drunk, but I would like feel like part of it. That built me up to be a lot more, because previously I was quite within myself. And there's times where I went back into that, and we can maybe talk about that at university. And I'm really glad that I was going through those periods where I became a bit more of the guy that I wanted to be.
Did you ever feel lost?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Again, not being in the popular crowd at school, you do feel like, am I doing something wrong here? But at the same time, I never really wanted to be smoking weed at the pitches at lunchtime or getting kicked out of class. It just wasn't in my nature. But that's one of the ways at school anyway, in the era that we were, to gain status. Having good grades wasn't a great way to do that. Funnily enough, in sixth year, when you're all applying to university and I get 4 unconditional offers to go to Glasgow Uni, that does elevate your status.
It's crazy how it just shifts.
And people are like, oh, wow. But then I was like, well, I was kind of building towards this, whereas people that were fucking around before, they were like a bit more, oh, I wish I'd got that. And you're like, maybe you do, maybe you don't, because what do you want to want is really key. Because a school like Bearsden is so keen to send everyone they can to higher education, because it's great for their stats. But as you probably know, you look around and you're like, I don't know if all of us should really want to go to university here. Like, I even question if university hadn't been funded by SAS through...
Would it have been something that you'd done?
Well, I don't know if I was been as keen, because I think it was a period for me growing up and learning a little bit, but it wasn't like the transformative thing that it could have been.
Yeah. So what year did you go to uni? Is this
2010 I went to university,
right.
Yeah. So I was still 17 because I turned 18 in October, so I had an ID for Freshers Week, which is good.
Yeah, so did you move for university, or did you
do you
stay
know what?
at home?
I think it's really common, and you may find this with your Scottish guests, that if you get into the uni you want to, because of the fact that the fees are paid, it is a more cost-effective way to do it. So I got into University of Glasgow, Russell Group institution, into my first choice, of course, politics. So me staying at home, not having the cost of halls of residence, not having the cost of any fees because it's paid for, I got put in my mum's car insurance so I could take the car sometimes into the West End. That was like a big draw for me, and it meant I stayed at my golf club, Hilton Park, and it meant I still played rugby for West of Scotland as well. There's 2 things that I think about that. One, amazing from like a fiscal perspective. I came out of uni with a little bit of savings because I worked during the summers when I was there, albeit not during the term, which was daft considering the amount of free time you have is insane. Could you imagine you started like a project like this, the podcast, when you were or if we had more time like that? It'd be insane how far ahead you could be, but you're still a kid then. So there was that in terms of like fiscally being free and not putting the same pressure on your family and yourself for the future, because I know a lot of my English counterparts come out with so much debt. Wild. But you also don't grow up as much because you're still at home. Your mum's still making your bed for you. She's still cooking you dinner. Whereas if you move into halls of residence, yes, they party and send it for like a full year, and that can set you back, but you do get forced to grow up in some other ways.
So did you feel you hadn't, at this point in your life, you hadn't fully grown up? Do you feel like there was a bit of
not even
comfort from
close.
home? Really?
Dale, not even close. Like, there's still the comfort blanket. I didn't. So my brother and I lived at home until I was 26
Okay.
because I was just saving up for a deposit. That was the
Yeah.
only thing for me. And when you live at home for university, you do break some grounds. You come home at 4 a.m. steaming.
Yeah.
You come home, you are sick, you're not well. You are breaking down some barriers that previously wouldn't have been there. I never did the whole bringing a girl back to my parents. I thought I was extremely disrespectful.
Right.
But
People who do it, I think, is wild. I mean, it's different for me. Like, one thing I'm grateful for was my mum and dad splitting up, because it forced me to grow up. Because it was always going back and forth. And when I could, I moved out. I got a rented place when I was 17. Albeit very, very wild house that we had for 6 months, but it forced my hand to grow up. And looking back at it, you don't think of it as at the time, but absolutely great experience to force you to grow up.
yeah, and if you don't move out at a young age, that's delayed, or
Yeah.
you have to seek it through other means.
Yeah. So life for you at this point then, journalism's still at the very forefront of your mind. You go into university. Did you have an idea what university would be like and what it was actually like? Because I know you spoke about this before, of how I guess let's back up a sec. The political views that you end up start developing as a young adult, what do you feel that you developed that from your own choice? Did you feel you were getting biased from what Dad was talking about?
Bias from the household,
Right.
bias from the media I was consuming. Because at that point in time, while BBC and Channel 4 are typically left-leaning, they had like sketch shows. There was a guy called Rory Bremner. I can't remember what his sketch show was called, but he would make fun of how ridiculous the kind of lefty policies were.
Okay.
And I always remember being like, oh man, the left are so stupid. Socialists are so daft.
brainwashing you from a young age.
But then I would also have conversations in school, and typically teachers tend to be a little bit left-leaning because they've worked in the public sector. They don't really understand the mechanics of the private sector. And I remember even at school being like objecting to what the teachers were saying. I was like, actually,
really?
I think you'll find, but only in modern studies or politics, not in the other classes. So God knows what they were teaching me in other classes that I probably should have
Just
disagreed
went
with.
over your
Yeah.
head.
But yeah, from a very young age, I had fiscally and socially conservative views
Okay.
that weren't always in alignment with the vast majority of people. Interestingly, Scotland has a really funny relationship with conservatism because of the legacy of Margaret Thatcher. Now, Margaret Thatcher did many great things, but she had a branding issue, what she did with the poll tax in Scotland and with milk as well, interestingly enough. So a lot of Scottish people are actually quite conservative in their nature, but the brand of the Conservatives means they could never, ever vote for it. And so when I was maybe defending those policies, defending those things, people would find it quite difficult because they would sort of agree with what I was saying in terms of the principles, but the fact that I was voting for a party that had a blue ribbon on it was completely incompatible with their value set and their upbringing, which is quite interesting. And it will be interesting in the coming years if Reform can position themselves as a party that ticks those boxes for them, but doesn't have the legacy of a Margaret Thatcher or a Tory, then they might actually do very, very well with the type of people in Scotland who want that sort of policy. But yeah, I was very comfortable in my own skin in those political views from a very young age. So by the time I got to university, those were pretty well formed views, albeit open to learning a lot more. And a lot of the texts we got at university were either really challenging to that and the polar opposite, like a Karl Marx or a Gramsci, which is a socialist writer, or John Locke or Adam Smith, who are very like the kind of foundations of what I would call right of centre thinking.
What's one of the kind of first arguments or first times that this comes to mind? You're like, hang on, that's completely bullshit.
Yeah, we'll go with this one. Okay, so in first year at Glasgow, you pick 3 subjects. So politics, which was my main degree, and then you could pick 2 others. One of them I picked economic and social history, and one of them I picked public policy.
Why?
They try and give you a broadness, and if, for example, you weren't getting on in your main degree, you could go and do those 2 as long as you got the grades to get into second year, and then to go beyond that, you could carry on, which is actually quite helpful. Or you could then choose to do a joint honours and all that sort of stuff. And I remember in public policy, one of the conversations was around feminism, and one was around the NHS, and then one was around environmental policy. I remember just kind of sitting quietly in this lecture of like 400 students and just being like, we are just being like shouted down here that like white men are the devil. Anyone that looks to try and make money is a horrible person. We should all give more money to the state so the state can tell us what to do with it. Yeah. And I was just sitting there thinking, whoa, I couldn't agree any less with what's been spoken about here, because I've grown up around men and women, and not all men are horrible people, and I'm a man and I'm not a very horrible person. In fact, the girls that I'm friends with from school and university all think I'm quite a nice guy. It's like I'll happily buy a round of drinks the night out, and I'm not doing that to manipulate them. I'm just doing it because I've got a spare tenner in my pocket and it's £1 drinks at Jelly Baby. Do you know, like, and I remember just sitting there in the lecture thinking, they're painting in what's called broad strokes. So big, general, sweeping generalizations about all men are this, all white men are this. Again, if they'd said that about all black men, there would have been a riot, wouldn't there? So I was thinking, I'm really quite uncomfortable with this. And a lot of the lecturers and the tutors at the university had that ideology that we still have a little bit of in the UK just now, where they have a bogeyman and a bad guy. And I just disagree with their diagnosis of the situation.
So how do you navigate that through university? Did you end up sticking it out, or do you?
I learned not to write essays that were too firmly with my own beliefs, because you wouldn't have got good grades. But I was at university for a means to an end. I wanted a degree. I wanted a bit of paper. I knew that coming from the schooling that I came from and doing the jobs I wanted to do in the future, or thought I might want to do in the future, you needed this bit of paper. I still think nowadays, I think we're only just on the cusp of big employers recognizing that they can have trained apprenticeships, that they don't need somebody to come from a good uni to try and filter out. Because nowadays there's so many people going to whatever university, getting a 2-1, and then there's 100 applications for one job, and they're filtering through, and they're like, okay, if you don't have a 2-1, we cut out these 10. Okay, if it didn't come from this tier of university, we cut out these 5. And then they're like, right, okay, we'll do psychometric testing with this bunch, and then we'll do interviews. Really, really, really difficult. And even 2014, when I graduated, the number of applications I had to do to find jobs was absolutely bananas. So I stuck it out because it was a means to an end for me. I didn't really enjoy it. And in the first 2 years, I didn't really engage. I felt a little bit shy in some of the tutorials compared to how I'd been at school. But in third, fourth year, where I applied myself a bit more in terms of doing a lot more of the reading pre-lectures or pre-seminars, I was more able to give it a bit more back and forth.
Right, okay. So that's probably the part that you started to enjoy then a little bit more.
100%. And I was also more confident in my body as then, again, Dale, because again, I kicked on in terms of like my development, my training. I actually stopped playing rugby because I kept getting shoulder injuries, and I fell much more in love with fitness YouTube. Yeah. Chris Jones, Physiques of Greatness, Christian Guzman, Matt Ogus, and who else will I shout out? Michael Corey. I don't know if you ever watched him.
Yeah.
I think he was Canadian, maybe.
Yeah. But is he still creating content?
Who knows? Do you know what?
That's a name. That's
how
a
different is your YouTube algorithm now?
Oh yeah, it's
to
wild.
Back then.
Yeah, and like we'll probably get into this, but the whole like YouTube algorithm of who's getting famous these days, whether these guys were fully natural back in the day or not, but the guys these days definitely aren't. Like it's almost like you wear it as a brand. It's like, I take X, Y, and Z. Trend twins, everything. Like it's
well,
mental.
And then there's the kind of mid ground, isn't there? There's the guys that now are like, I'm on TRT.
Yeah, which is,
and you're like, TRT, and you can speak to this properly. TRT is actually really low dose. Some of these guys are not taking low dose TRT. They're taking what's like
200 milligrams.
Yeah, and you're like, that's not TRT, but they're saying it's TRT because it feels like they can say that to their followers and not lose the respect of them.
Yeah, which is, it's an interesting dynamic. The whole what will other people think of me, and who stands out to me when I was growing up and consuming fitness content was like Ulysses Jr., Simeon Panda came on the scene. And then you just start getting into that bodybuilding, and then it was Rich Piana, and Rich Piana was one of the first guys that were like, here, I'm not bullshitting you here. Here's the stuff that I'm taking. And he took a lot of stuff. He was a very unique character and ended up sadly passing away. But that's what kind of opened my eyes. I was like, these guys are lying. So the term fake natty wasn't a term that we saw growing up. So the people that you're starting to, or the information you're starting to consume, these guys were like role models. There was from 2014 to, I think it was like maybe even up to 2020, there was a fitness pursuit then. How did that start to develop? So you start seeing your body change, you start, obviously it's like anything, it feels great, it feels amazing. That transfers probably over into your confidence, as you were saying. And then also the attention. There's no doubt about it, you start getting attention. The rise of social media, hitting the right spot of that. So engagement and likes, we grew up just at the back end of that, or the start of that, should we say.
When did you have your first smartphone?
Do you know, that's a good question. I remember the Walkmans, right? Blackberries was obviously a big thing throughout high school. BBM. I wanted one, but my mum and stepdad never got me one. I remember getting the iPhone maybe after 5th year, 6th year maybe. Or no, it was iPod, sorry. I remember the screen. Do you know what?
I had my BlackBerry my first 2 years at uni.
Was it? Is that when it was? Yeah.
I was still using the BlackBerry, so that was 2011, 2012.
Yeah, so you're 1 year older than me. I remember doing the milk delivery, and I remember getting a BlackBerry that my stepdad, he was like, I got a new one, you can take this. And I was like, yes, I've got BBM. And I jumped out the van to deliver milk, and I dropped it and smashed it. And I was like, shit, it's going to kill me. So that I must have been about 16 then, 15, 16. And then from there, that's when social media started to pop off a bit more. So did that attention, like were you on social media at this point? Did you do much?
I had Facebook and Twitter. I had Bebo back in the day, but then uni was very Facebook. Like I remember but what was interesting at uni, in the lectures, unless you had like a good data package, you wouldn't really be on your phones. Could you imagine what it'd be like nowadays?
Texting? Remember you was like, oh, this is my last text. Like, yeah. Speak to you after the weekend.
If you couldn't be bothered speaking to the bird, you'd be like, oh, I'm out of minutes. I can phone you next week.
Or just straight up Pat's like, sorry, I've got no text left. Like, imagine getting away with that excuse these days. They'd be like, what are you
bring
talking
it back.
About? I know, it's wild.
But in uni, you would finish your lecture and we would go to the uni library. Maybe there was a gap of an hour or 2 hours before the next one. And we would sit on Facebook. And do you know what we'd also read? TrueLad.com. That was like that. It was like this like stupid site where it'd be like
Lad Bible type of thing.
Yeah, right, it probably where Lad Bible came from. I think they maybe just changed the name. And it'd be like some daft story of like, went on a night out at uni, this happened.
Early days of Reddit.
And then it would just finish with Lad at the end of it. And I remember me and my friend Matteo, we'd sit at uni and just read this stupid shit. But we'd have to log on to Facebook in the library to like message all your pals. Whereas nowadays, it's so instant. Like in a lecture nowadays, I would really struggle to sit for an hour and not think about wanting to check something. Like I'm going to Jordan Peterson in June. I'm really looking forward to it.
Oh, nice.
Now, I'll be able to sit through that no problem without my phone. But say it was a less engaging speaker, you might be like, I wonder if I've got any emails I need to
just that
check.
Fear, like it kind of creeps up your neck and you're like, okay, right, I'm met with this I am bored type of response. And what I've trained my mind to do is reach for the dopamine
stimulus.
Yeah, stimulus is
frightening, isn't it? But yeah, I guess back to your question, I was getting into fitness. I was watching fitness YouTube. Christian Guzman was a big inspiration. Chris Jones of Physiques of Greatness played a big role. And these guys were teaching about macros and calories, progressive overload. Previously, I would have done like a body part split, or I was doing full body, but the same movements every day and the same weights. I didn't really understand. Like I knew I needed to get stronger, but I couldn't really figure out how. It sounds crazy, but that was how it was. So I got into that and I started to see real changes. I think 2013 was when I had like kind of like visible, like muscular abs, not just like wee guy abs. And I remember at West Rugby, we actually had, I think, and I just finished playing, but they wanted me to come and do like a Buff Butler thing. Like we had a thing called a slave auction, which again nowadays politically incorrect, but girls would bid for a guy to be their slave for the night.
Right. But understand the concept, but wild.
Yeah, exactly. Nobody did any colour related appropriation or that, thank goodness. Although one year there was a Halloween party and people went as the Jamaican bobsleigh team.
I've got some friends who've dressed up as black football players for Halloween, and those images sit on Facebook, and I think to myself, wow, what a time! Like just in a short space of time. So that's only 5-10 years.
Do you know what's mad though? None of your friends did that out of racial hatred or badness. But somebody who finds that photo might decide for them on their behalf that that's what they did. In the same way that I mentioned the Jamaican bobsleigh team, the costume was amazing, and that film Cool Runnings, everyone loves that film, right? And the characters are loved. So like again, somebody putting shoe polish on is not a good thing, right? But they weren't doing it from a bad perspective. It's really funny how quickly what somebody did 5-10 years ago, what somebody said 5-10 years ago becomes politically unacceptable. And I really wish we wouldn't judge the standards of today for the past. Yeah,
there's tons of celebrities who've been kind of pulled up where they tweeted something 10 years ago, and just because of the world that we live in today, there's a different standard or what's accepted, as you said. Imagine having smartphones of the stuff and everything that we got up to, everything being videoed, everything on Snapchat, everything being talked about. Who would have thought the era that we grew up would be a part of our personal brand, especially the careers and what we've chosen to do with our lives today? It's like, sometimes I go in, what's it called, Time Hop, and it tells you, it's like, there's a Facebook post you made back in 2010, you're like,
no, you go and delete it.
Delete, like, no one can ever see that. So it's like,
people used to talk about themselves on Facebook in the third person, so it'd be like, Colin
that
is
was me.
studying.
That was me.
Colin is at the library having a Red Bull. And I was like, was that not, why am I doing that?
I know, it's just, but it's so hard to explain to someone now why we done that. Nobody can really explain their
But
behaviour.
I bet people are going to look at what they were doing, like all the TikTok dances during C19, right?
Yeah.
People are going to be like, I can't believe I
yeah.
danced to Jason Derulo or The Weekend Blinded by the Lights.
So it's ever changing. It's ever changing. Just speaking of Facebook, I remember going on my 6-year holiday to Magaluf and we put euros into a computer to log on to Facebook as well, like
to put your status up.
So it was all restricted, but it was the drive of being on social media was something that we were all sort of craving because it was what friends were doing. It was just what you done. Never back then did I think that this would be part of my branding, my personal branding, and that sort of stuff. And looking through, I actually went way back on your Instagram, found some belters on there. But looking back at the early days, the fitness content that ended up starting to be produced. So this came from watching these guys on YouTube, and what it looks like is you were on a path of your university, the journalism, etc. You find fitness start doing really well, and it's like, this could also be a path that I go down. So talk through that.
I don't know if I ever thought I was going to quote unquote make it in the fitness side of things.
Why?
But I think I just wanted to create the content because I was passionate about it, which is quite a helpful thing. Like, see, same for the podcast. Did I ever have delusions that it would be a top 1% podcast, or that I would have spoken to Daniel Priestley in Dubai or Rory Sutherland and I don't know, 60,000 plays with the Critical Drinker on YouTube? That was never the thought process. The thought process was, I really like the format. I listen to tons of podcasts. I think I can contribute in terms of my skill set that I've got, and I think I'm going to get better at it. And a phrase that I've been coming back to a lot recently is, if not you, then who? So just step up and see what you're capable of off the back of it. The fitness stuff was probably more of just a blog and just interested in posting. I was really, again, post kind of Christian Guzman, post uni, I was more inspired by like Rob Lipsett and Joe Delaney, both of who I got to speak to in the podcast in the last few years, which was really
surreal.
Cool. Yeah, genuinely. The stream with Joe Delaney, I remember that was early in the podcast as well, maybe like episode 60 odd. I remember being like, whoa, that was so cool. Like, because Joe Delaney's videos used to finish with, Joe Delaney is my hero. And I genuinely was like, Joe Delaney, he's not my hero, but he is a hero. And I love that guy. So a lot of my content in those days, 2014, 2015, 2016 on Instagram was like me with the 6-pack and the Elise shorts and the sunglasses and the Casio watch and maybe listening to house or techno. I was being like a diet Joe Delaney. I wasn't being authentically myself, but I was being influenced by that in the right way. Did I think I was ever going to make it? Did I think I was going to become a YouTuber or start building stuff? No, but I just loved creating the content at that time and the bit of attention that comes off the back of it. Because again, having been the kind of shy, quieter guy at school that wasn't amazing with birds, that wasn't very confident, I was becoming the guy that would go up and talk to people, or a girl would be like, whoa, I've not seen you since school. Like, what happened to you? Or a guy from school would be like, mate, I'm going on holiday in 6 weeks. Like, what would you do? And I'll be like, you get no chance, mate, don't worry about it.
So that feels good, doesn't it? Yeah,
or I'd be like, count your macros and train. Like, I like talking about it as well. But I never had that desire to be a big time creator. I just liked doing it.
So you did you create this page with your brother initially?
Yeah, it was the two of us.
Both of you. Because I was looking at one of the pictures and I was like, it's not Colin. And I was like, and then it's written in like first person.
Do you see how shredded he was as well?
Both of these guys, like back then. And I screenshotted this one, the Campbells compare, the Americano with milk and then the Frappuccino. I love that you were doing this. This is 5th of September 2017.
That's so long ago, bro.
It's crazy. Like, and all this stuff still stands true today, and it forever will. Like, new research will always come out. But as I was looking back and trying to kind of navigate, right, what does it look like from the outside looking in? There was a post as well about coaching inquiries and that sort of stuff. So there must have been a pivot where you're like, should we do this? We
did a tiny bit of coaching, but do you know something that struck me, and you'll maybe share this frustration, but I think you're much more wired to do this than I am, with fitness anyway. I found it really frustrating that people couldn't stick to what you'd advise they do. And I remember being like, oh, well, I can do that. And at that point in time, 2014, I graduated, went into a sales role, not journalism, was traveling all around the UK, was getting in ruthless shape, as you saw, in terms of the, and my physique's definitely developed since then, but arguably some of those photos are as lean as you've maybe seen me. And I remember being like, I don't understand why people can't do the same meal plan as me or do the same training as me. Like, I've just driven 4.5 hours to Derby, done a 2-hour sales event, knocked my pan in, and I'm gonna go and train legs with a caffeinated beverage in my hand and my headphones on and send it. But as I've matured, I understand not everyone's wired the same, and not everyone has the
experience
same. Not everyone has the same driver.
Lack of maybe
life experience as well,
and a bit of empathy as well, like of like different situations.
That's so right.
But we're so young and naive at that point.
So when Ian and I were doing a bit of the coaching, it was a bit of that. It was a bit like, I can't really see why other people don't get this the way that we do. And it never really took off. We maybe had like 4 or 5 clients at a time. I got one really good result for a boy I went to school with. It was really funny because he'd done coaching with a woman who went to a gym that we went to that was PTing him, and his result was pretty rubbish because she had him doing loads of HIIT and loads of cardio. And I remember being like, mate, we're just gonna get you to walk for your cardio. And he held on to so much more muscle. And I remember him being like, "Wow, that was mad." And I was like,
I've seen the transformation.
Yeah,
picture
and
in it.
I remember being like, David, the reason for that is because we've just maintained your energy so that you can lift heavy on legs and lift heavy on your press and your pulling, rather than doing like loads of Tabata ropes or sprints and stuff like that as well. But she told him all that burns fat, and I was like,
that was error though. That was information that was coming out.
That's so true. But I'd watched better information. Like, I'd watched how Rob Whitson was getting lean. I'd watched how Joe Delaney stayed lean. I'd watched how Chris Jones would do his cardio. I'd watched Christian Guzman do the stepper, but he wasn't doing like the rower just or the assault bike. He was just burning calories. So yeah, the coaching thing was never massive for me. And it's interesting now that I've done a lot more sales coaching, the difference in my passion for the sales coaching and my understanding of how to communicate it is way better than what it was for health and fitness as well. And that speaks to me on a level because it means I've found something that's got more legs to it. In the same way, look at how you took to fitness coaching. It really spoke to you, and you were Coach Crosser in your work at Openreach.
Yeah, so the seed was planted.
That's right.
And I think we look back at our stories and you go through it and you always find these like lessons and you're like, that makes sense why I'm doing what I'm doing now. So back then you graduate uni, you go into a sales role. What was that? Just, I'm going to apply for roles, I need to get a job? Like what's going through your mind at this point?
So each summer between finishing uni in like May and going back to uni in September, I had 2 summer jobs. The first of those was sports coaching. So I'd done a lot of coaching rugby at school and coaching rugby in my early days at university. So I did a multi-sports camp. So like basketball, rugby, tennis, rounders, and basically then babysitting the kids during the day as well when their parents dropped them off from work. And that would go for like 6 or 7 weeks. But then there would be a gap between going back to uni and that happening, and I would want to still earn money. And I accidentally fell into this job with a company called Ensley Insurance, who were a student insurer. So they would do insurance for student possessions, like their gadgets, their laptops, their phones, or even just all their clothes and their bags and their possessions that they took with them to uni. Yeah. I initially applied for it thinking it was like a PR role. So you would go to like a freshers fair, or you would go to the key collection when the students move into university, give them a flyer about insurance, and they would either go on the website or actually in 2011, I thought they would actually phone the call centre, but it turned into being an event. It turned into a role where you were actually selling on the day, not just directing people to another thing. So I thought I was doing this like kind of PR, like push people towards something, like be a friendly face, give them a voucher or a discount code and be like, on you go. But it was actually a face-to-face sales role. And that was not something I was up for at that moment in time. But the training that I got and the experiences I got meant that I became somebody that fell into this. Yeah. And my first ever sale, I was in Unite Blackfriars, which is a big student accommodation in the city centre of Glasgow. What would happen is the students would pick up their key, they would pick up their internet cable. That's the area we were in. And then the next table was the insurance table. Now, every accommodation provider typically buys some sort of insurance for their students so that every student that lives there has something. So if there's a big fire or a flood or a theft, they have some cover. So they would sit down and you would say, the good news is you've got insurance. And again, I can say all this off the bat. It's mad, right? But
it's just ingrained and imprinted in it. Yeah.
Well, see, you know what? You said I was robotic. I'm a bit like that sometimes. So you would go through the cover they've got given to them already, and you would show them how they could access that if they need to make a claim. And then you would say, but if there's anything else you've brought with you really care about, then we can protect that as well. What have you brought to university you really care about that's was particularly valuable. And it would often be like, mum's just bought me a new Acer laptop, or I've brought this with me, or I brought that with me. And then you would be like, okay, well, we can cover it for this, and it's this, how much it costs. And the first sale I ever made was a boy that had moved to Glasgow from somewhere up north. He was going to study at Glasgow School of Art, and he had this big electric sewing machine, and he had a MacBook Air that was like, back in the day, it was like 900 quid. Yeah. MacBook Air's a lot more expensive now, right? But he had this sewing machine, it was like $2,500, and Unite's policy covered like certain particular like technical items up to like 1,000. So I topped up his cover to insure this like insane sewing machine, and we insured his MacBook outside of his room, so when he took it to the library, if he dropped it or if it got stolen or whatever, it was all covered. And I remember the buzz of me being like, oh, this is how it's all structured, this is how much it's going to be. You can pay cash or card, it's either $14.99 on direct debit, or you can pay up front for £112 for the year. And I remember them being like paying up front, and me like getting the card terminal and being like, take this.
That's a lot of money.
But it was really, really cool to go through that process. So that job, every summer I would do it between first and second year, second and third year, third and fourth year. And then when I graduated fourth year, they offered me a job as a graduate account manager. Okay. So I went from being the guy that would go to the freshers fairs and do the events during September, October, to being the person that would sell the insurance at the top level to the accommodation providers. So my customers became like Unite, University of Glasgow, University of Edinburgh. And yes, I still ran the campaigns where during September I would take a team of uni students to that event and do the sales, but I was doing the B2B as well as the B2C. So I really fell into that role. And I guess the journalism piece, to make sure we put a pin in that, 6 weeks into my time at uni, the Glasgow Herald made something like 85% of their staff redundant and moved to freelancers. And we were talking about the boom in social media during that time. How many people do you know in our age group that buy a newspaper?
I know.
So everyone switched. Blogs. So the industry disappeared, and they got a lot of freelancers. So if you go on like the Daily Record website, God help you if you do, you click onto it, it's full of ads. But that's nowhere near as profitable for them as when they were selling thousands or tens of thousands of their newspaper copies across Scotland. Every van in the country had one in the window. Every office, people would sit at lunchtime having their lunch, not on their phones, but reading newspapers. That completely changed. So journalism as a career fundamentally changes the path. So I started to think away from that at that moment in time as well. And it's only when I started the podcast that I came back to journalistic stuff.
See, when you think of people like Chris, who you've had on podcast, Savage, well, Storyteller Chris now.
Oh, he's rebranded?
So he's an example of a market pivoting, but pivoting with the market and that sort of stuff. Did you see yourself trying to pivot, or was it just like the pin in that's dead, I'm going to pursue something else that's coming up?
I got a bit lazy with writing the match reports because I was in the uni lifestyle. I was still playing golf, I was still playing rugby, or I was playing a bit of rugby in my first 2 years, but I was getting way more into the gym, and I was like, I'm not going to go and write the match reports anymore because I'm playing rugby on the same day, so I can't write the match report for the same team, so I'll need to maybe think of something else. So I got lazy from that perspective. And even, again, a conversation at the dinner table, probably mum and dad, I was like, doesn't seem like there's many jobs in journalism now. My dad was like, just you focus, get your degree, work in your summer jobs and see what you want to do. And I applied for so many different graduate jobs, but Ainsley had kept tabs on me through university, so I always knew there was a little bit of a light left on for me. But they initially wanted me to relocate to Manchester and Leeds because there was a guy that was in the Scotland job, albeit underperforming. So my first 6 month contract with them, they gave me a 6 month contract after uni. I was shitting myself if it didn't get renewed. But I took that, and I was technically based in Manchester and Leeds. They put me in an apartment for the first month or two, and then they basically performance managed the Scotland guy out, so I came up and got the
So what's going
job.
through your mind then? 6 month contract, are you the character that you've developed at this point in your life through gym and other aspirations? Are you applying yourself 110%? I know you talk about this all the time. There's a high standard that you hold yourself to, but very few people. I noticed that when I joined BT and Openreach, I was like, standards very low here. Just work hard, and that skill alone of just, I'm going to show up and give this my best shot, would separate you from anyone else in that role. So is that what you saw?
I think it's such an eye-opener when you first go into the working world, how average or poor the average person is in terms of their ability, but two, their application. Interestingly enough, I think there's sort of two types of individuals. There's those that are really talented, that are understimulating themselves and not pushing themselves. And then there's those that are under-talented and they're either working just to stay level, or they're just not applying themselves at all. And those are the real problems typically when you look at a team. So yeah, I looked around And within a couple of months, I was like, I think they're going to want to extend me because one, they've known me for years and years and years, and the circumstances just need to change. So timing needed to be favourable. But I also viewed it as just experience because every graduate job asks you for experience, and you're thinking, I've just come out of, how can I have experience? I had this conversation with a young guy the other day, and he was saying to me, he's 21, he finishes uni in May, so in a couple of months' time, and he was like, how do I get the experience that's necessary? And I said to him, it's really unfair, but what they almost expect you to do, and this is disgusting, they expect you to do a free internship or a low paid internship. And he was like, oh, I just don't know how I'm going to do that. And I was like, I was very fortunate in some ways, but also by a product of circumstance, I lived at home during that period. So if I'd been paid really poorly during that period, which thankfully I wasn't paid too poorly, I would have just lived at home to gather experience for as long as possible. And I think that's where, if you do have a secure family, you have to lean on that. And you have to be like, you have to. And again, I lived at home up until the age of 26 to enable me to save up £40,000 for a deposit because I was just like, that's what I need to do. And I'm fortunate that my family circumstances were enjoyable for that period. But even if they hadn't been, I think there'd been an element of like, I'm just going to have to. It's crazy. It's like, do it.
I remember the meme that's like a pair of scissors and the plastic film. And it's like, to open the scissors, you need a pair of scissors. That's almost like the comparison that you draw the experience with. And
I feel so sorry for the people coming out.
I think there's going to be a shift, though, like you said, especially with businesses that are starting to recognise we can run these modern day apprenticeships and internships for developing a skill like within the company, because every large corporate company has different aspects of it, whether it's call centre, but sales, marketing, like. It's running a business at the end of the day. It can be, there's so many different branches to that can be applied.
Right. One of the first kind of well-paid collabs I did on Instagram was 2019, and it was with the British Army, and they asked me to speak about resilience in careers, because either guys that have gone through their cohort and then are passing out into civilian life, or they're maybe trying to progress within the army. And the thing that I spoke about that got me the paid speaking gig with them was speaking about, I think I did something like, and I had an email tracker of this, 120 applications for graduate jobs in 2014, of which I think I got through to the assessment centre, which was like psychometric testing for numerical reasoning, which I was fucking shit at, and then like some sort of other sort of psychometric stuff. I think I got through to something like 16 out of 100, so 16%. And then of those tests, I passed 2 of them, or I passed in the highest enough quartile for 2 of them. But I took a job that didn't do any of that with me because they knew me from before. So the amount of resilience you need to go through that sort of hiring process, and I imagine it's every bit as bad now for the young guys coming through that are graduating university or coming out of college, coming out of school, to get these jobs is so difficult. I'm a big believer on hire on attitude and train aptitude, albeit I had a slight flair for skills and communication and being a bit salesy and being able to speak to people and understand where they're coming from and position my solution with them. But so much of it was just like, I'm just going to try and get good at this. Just teach me how. Yeah.
Because in that skill is then transferred into you. We'll come on to it in a bit, but fully developed, like almost, it's like, I think you're like gaming characters who maxed out this skill now, and it's like, right, I'm ready to pivot here. Yeah, I'm ready to go into the next chapter. So fast forward, then you do this role, you apply yourself 110% to it. Yes, you've got the fitness thing kind of growing in the background, posting a bit of content here and there. Where does it then start getting bigger and better for you at this point?
In my second or third year in that job, we started doing, probably my second year in the job, Ensley had a monopoly of the universities. So we worked with something like 80% of the universities with a policy in place. So what you were effectively doing was renewing the account and looking after it. But that policy could be used in anyone that provided student accommodation. So a lot of letting agents and landlords rent to students during the term time. So we took that policy and started selling it into that market, which meant that we had to approach people who'd never heard of us before or had heard of us but didn't understand how the policy worked. And they certainly didn't spend money at that moment in time on insurance for their tenants, which meant for the first time I was cold calling. So I would phone up letting agents, phone landlords, try and get a meeting, and basically doing what was called prospecting to generate new business. And that was a really daunting prospect, but I knew that it was a big part of what I could potentially add value to my skill set through doing. And I was still living at home at this point in time. And I remember I would use the dining room in my parents' house for my office. And I remember I would sit in the kitchen at lunchtime and mum would come through and be like, oh, how did your morning go? How did your calls go this morning? Because she knew I was doing cold calling, because I was telling them, I was like, dreading this. And I'd be like, oh yeah, well, I got 2 meetings this morning, or actually I got hung up on by 3 people this morning, or actually it was mostly just voicemails this morning. And she would say to me, and this would go on for a few months, you sound really nervous, Colin. You're umming and ehing a lot. And my mum was completely correct. And it's that sort of growth-minded encouragement that I'm very, very thankful for my upbringing. And I would say to her, I am nervous, Mum. And the reason I was nervous is, 1, I hadn't done enough reps, but 2, I didn't quite know what to say. So if somebody said to me, oh, how do we include this for our students? Or what would happen if a claim happens? I didn't know the answer because it was all new. And nobody else in the team knew the answer because it was new to them as well.
You need to build up the library.
That's right. And like the script that you had or the prompts that you had were so underdeveloped. So I was like writing them down on one screen, and I would phone and I'd be like shaking. And over time, I had to do enough repetitions, so I knew that when somebody says this objection, you say this back. When somebody asks this question, ask this question back, because it will unlock the information you need. Or just say this to request a meeting and reassure them that, look, we're not going to cover all this on the phone just now. Let me come into your office next Tuesday. I can do 3 or 4 o'clock. What works for you? But that took so much for me to get to that. So we started doing new business. In the first year, there was 5 of us doing new business in the team. I finished on 13k, and it meant that 13k commission income for the business. It meant I got a 3k bonus, which is the first time I'd ever had like a new business bonus. So I was like, oh, amazing. The 3 guys below me, they did maybe like 1 or 2k each in terms of revenue compared to my 13. So basically nothing, right? Huge. But on top of the leaderboard was my Welsh colleague called Stuart Jones. He did something like 32k, so more than double what I did. So me being me was like, Stuart, like talk me through, like what was it you were doing? How were you doing it? And this was a really important lesson for me. Stuart was from a place called Aberdare in the valleys in Wales, had the thickest Welsh accent ever. At a conference once, one of my customers said to me, oh, I love working with you and I love working with Stuart. Stuart is mad as a box of frogs. And he is. He would open cold calls with jokes. He would laugh down the phone, this thick Welsh kind of girthy laugh. So I realised that I couldn't try and copy what Stuart was doing because his style was quite unique. And it was a really important lesson to not try and be the B-Tech or the Aldi version of somebody else. Again, if we speak about what I've done with the podcast, my first guest was Chris Williamson. Incredibly inspiring. But I've always said I never want to be the B-Tech or the Aldi version of Chris. Maybe there's traits that I have that are similar in terms of maybe I structure some of my research in the same way. You take the good points from somebody, but you don't steal. But what I could take from Stuart was doing a lot of walk-ins. So he was walking into letting agents in Gloucester, Bath, Surrey, and he was exposing himself to that. I wasn't doing that in Edinburgh or Manchester or Liverpool where I was prospecting. I was primarily doing phone and email. He also would write really, really detailed meeting minutes of what the customer told him was important, what their student bed numbers were, what the profit might be if we did the deal at this deal versus and they sold it onto the students at this. So I was like, okay, that's really good. And he also did our proposal document because insurance is regulated. It'd be like a 13, 14 page document. He would do a summary document. It was like, he'd call it like a 1-pager, and it would be at the main points. And often the busy landlord or the busy letting agent would just read the 1-pager, and if they were happy, they would sign the proposal. So I could copy some things that he was doing. And in the second and the third year that we were doing new business, I started to grow. I was doing kind of like 50, 60 grand a year. But as that developed, I realized if I want to get paid 50, 60, 70, 80, 100 grand, I can't just bring in 60, 70k of revenue for the business. I need to be bringing in hundreds. So I decided to move to a bigger insurer, which wasn't in the student space. It was in the more commercial combined space called Aspen. And this was something we were speaking about right before we hit record. I went from being the kind of golden boy at Ensley where they were like, oh, Colin's like top of new business, doing really, really well, to a bigger company where I was pretty unknown, but they saw me as quite young and talented and good at new business. And moved there in March 2019. In the first week of May 2019, coming up for 6 years ago now, they called everyone into the board meeting in Glasgow and they said, there's been a transaction gone through, which means an American hedge fund has purchased the business and the entire UK operation will be made redundant as of 12 weeks' time.
Wow.
So everyone in the entire building made redundant.
So let's back up a sec. So Golden Boy at a company, handing your notice in to say you're going to pivot to someone else is also a very nerve-wracking experience, right? Or at least it was for me. Like, just any roles that I've had to transit, even within the same organisation, it's something that I don't know whether it's one of my character traits of being a people pleaser or whatever, but you don't want to let them down. What was that like? Were they like, oh no, stay, we can do something, or were they very much supportive in your growth journey?
Not supportive at all. I was the only Scottish employee.
Right.
And that's kind of been the case for a lot of the businesses I've worked from. They kind of hire me as a bit of an anomaly and just let me do my thing because I'm quite a good self-starter, even from a young age. They were pretty upset because I was saying that what the scale that we were doing things on wasn't going to be big enough for me, and I wanted to be involved in bigger and better things. Yeah. And they kept dangling the carrot and be like, oh, well, actually, we're going to do this policy which generates this revenue. But it was all hypotheticals, ifs and buts and maybes. And I knew that I wanted to get somewhere where the size of the deals that I was involved in, rather than being like, I think the most I made off a letting agent deal was I think they had something like 1,000 student bedrooms under management in Liverpool. And I think we made, for argument's sake, like 18k off the deal. But that's 18k for the business, not 18k for me.
Yeah.
Whereas I was moving to an insurer that they were selling policies for tens of thousands of pounds, sometimes hundreds of thousands of pounds. So of course there could be much more money in it.
Where's your concept of money coming from at this point? So that's one thing we've not really spoke about. Was parents very open and transparent about it, or did you sort of have to kind of work this out for yourself?
I never had any idea what my dad earned. None. Even now, I'm not sure. Like, again, we don't need to talk about. We'll talk about it because I'm in sales. But when I first started earning six figures for the first time through my day job, my dad was like, "Whoa, well done." And I just never thought like, "Oh, I wonder what dad's earned," because again, my grandpa played for Rangers. The house that we live in is my grandpa's house, my mum's side. So that was mortgage free, albeit it's got a hard upkeep costs. But it's a lovely house in Bearsden that we have the fortune of calling our family home. So there wasn't maybe the need for him to earn as much to pay for that if he otherwise. So the concept of money was always just be stable and be able to provide for yourself, be able to save up £400, £500, £600 a month to put in towards this mortgage fund that you're building up, Colin. So it's
very clean cut then. Yeah,
it was clean, but not super aspirational. There was no like, you want to earn 50 grand by this age, you want to earn 30, or you want to earn 30 grand by this age, you want to earn 40 grand by this age, you want to earn 50 grand by this age. It was very much just like slow and steady. Skill growth transactional as opposed to the financial aspect. But I definitely felt, and I started to understand, and I started to look around. So I had friends that, I don't think I was ever the one that was doing quote unquote best financially out of my friends, but when I graduated, they gave me an Audi A3 Sport. I think my first salary was like 22.5 grand. But back then, you actually keep loads of it because you have a personal allowance of like 12 grand. So I was like, oh, I actually have got quite a lot of money here. I remember one month when I was traveling the full month and I was on expenses, staying in hotels all over kind of England. I remember putting a cross into my ISA to save something like £1,300, and I was like, I think I get paid roughly that after tax. How has that happened? But it was because my living expenses were really low because I had the car and I had the expenses. But yeah, money was never. It was never something that was the only thing to focus on. But when I was looking around at some of my friends that were starting to earn like, oh, he's on 35 grand a year, or he's getting like 38 now. I was like, okay, I need to start doing the math and how you can do that. I was like, I need to probably be involved in bigger deals for me to do that, because I think my last year, my bonus at Ensley was like 9.5, 10 grand, and then the tax man took a ton of it as well, and I was like, oh. But I'd done 60k of revenue for the business, so how do I go to a business where I can do 150k and then maybe they'll pay me 30, 40 grand of that, and then my salary doubles. That was what I was thinking about, and that was the kind of the driver. So you say to them, look, I'm going to look for other opportunities. Do you get? How did that go? I went in with my notice. I never liked the idea of a counter offer. Right. Okay. When you're out of something, I think you're out. Anytime I've resigned from business to go somewhere else, even when they've been like, "Can you give us 2 days to put together a counter offer?" I've been like, "I'm really not in a position where I want to be trying to fight you for a few £1,000s here and there, my base salary and my bonus. I'm going to be leaving this new opportunity." In the same way, I think if you go in and you tell your missus it's over, I think you don't be like, oh, but I can change. I think putting a gun to somebody's head is the worst possible way to negotiate. No, I think it's a fair point to raise. So you make this transition.
is there any regrets in your mind at this point, or are you so set on, I'm going to make this, I'm going to repeat what I just done, and I'm going to give this my best shot?
I'm just going to repeat it in a bigger arena.
Yeah.
And I knew the skill set was transferable because all the interviews that I did to go to businesses like that were all like, we really like the fact that you can go from having never spoken to a prospect before to having a meeting, doing a proposal, and then signing a contract to be a client and then paying their invoice. And they're like, that's really valuable. And you know what? I didn't realize how valuable it was, because now when I talk to people online and they're like,
so is it disjointed, the process? Or
I think I've always been, I think I got really good at winning cold stuff and building a rapport with somebody and then understanding what requires to get something over the line. So even now when I speak to people online and they're talking to me about their sales process or what's valuable, I can really quickly analyze, okay, well, here and here's where you need to build more commitment, or actually your offer isn't quite right there. We need to position it better. And that was something that I got good at very early on. I was doing a lot of, some of the first podcasts I listened to, apart from a Rangers podcast, was Mindset with Muscle by Jamie Alderton.
Yeah.
And he did a podcast with Dan Meredith, who I've had on my show, called Body and the Beast. And then I was listening to sales podcasts as well, but they were all American.
Right, yeah. So everything was Americanized. That was the same. Like, it was just the podcast game, wasn't it?
What was the podcast you loved?
Mind Pump.
Mind Pump.
Yeah, it's the one I gravitated towards. I seen there was a post you put up. It was Sigma Nutrition. That was when I was laughing at. I was like, oh, the podcast seed was there. So that was 2016. 2016, mate. Right, which is
podcast
crazy.
was so young then.
And it was crazy. It's funny. You look at the brand and you're like, well, the standards have just grown.
They would have recorded that audio only.
Yeah.
On some sort of on a
phone or camera audio.
On a phone. And the value they were given would have been huge, but just not
production level wasn't even
not
thought about.
It wouldn't fly nowadays, unfortunately.
So getting made redundant then, 2019, so what you mid-20s? You think you've got this opportunity, you're now in the circle with what your friends are doing. How did that feel like?
It shook things, because we just got a mortgage for the flat in the January, my brother and I. So there's that overhead of just having purchased a property. And this was the first ever solo podcast that I did. And I actually was speaking to a young guy on Monday there. So it was quite funny time when we were talking about this. He's going through a really tough period and he was like, can you relate to this at all? And I was like, I've lived a very fortunate life. I feel like I haven't been through a lot of tragedy or challenge, but when the challenge has come, I've been able to rise to it. And so what happened during that board meeting when they told everyone they were made redundant, there were women in tears. There were guys that were like, oh my God. They gave us the company credit card and they were like, go to All Bar One, go have a drink, come back in tomorrow and we'll go through the actual process where you'll all find out when you'll have consultations with lawyers and when you'll have consultations with recruiters who can maybe look at other roles for you. And I remember walking down to the bar with them. And at this point in time, I kind of done a lot less drinking as well. I think we can definitely speak about that. But from 2014 on, when I finished university, I probably drank on average 3, 4, 5 times a year, absolute maximum. So we went to this bar. And I remember on the way to the bar, boy that I was working with, Ryan, being like shaking. And I was like, are you okay? He was like, oh, mate, I've been here for 2 years. It's been amazing. Like, I'm so sad this is happening. And I was like, well, I've been here 2 minutes, so I'm not really like...
You're not in.
I'm not in, but I'm annoyed. It's an inconvenience for me rather than like an upset. And I remember him being like, I don't smoke, but I'm going to go get some fags. Do you want fags? And I was like, I'm okay, mate. And I remember going into the bar and they were all ordering drinks. And I remember looking around and being like, this is like 11 o'clock in the morning. I was like, the last thing I want to do right now is put drink in my body. I want to train at the gym tonight. I'm going to update my CV with my 8 weeks of experience or however many weeks experience I had at Aspen. And then I'm going to try and deal with this. So when he was in the shop for fags, I phoned the recruiter who recruited specifically for insurance that placed me at Aspen. I said, Elaine, you're going to hear about this in the market very, very soon, but the entire UK operation for Aspen's been made redundant. I want you to put my CV back out to everyone that I was speaking to beforehand and any other new opportunities as well. So I decided, I was like, I'm going to try and control what I can control and not let this affect me. And things moved really, really quick. I had 2 final interviews for 2 different insurance brokers within like 4 or 5 weeks. And I got an offer from Marsh & McClellan, who my brother worked at, interestingly enough, which is the world's biggest insurance broker. And I joined what's called their Sales Academy, which is a fast-track scheme to sales director.
Okay.
In the July. So I didn't even use my full 12 weeks of redundancy.
Yeah,
so I landed on my feet. And I got the reassurance that, again, somebody that can open up business from cold and turn it into a client, there's a place for you in this business. There's a place for you in any business to some extent, as long as the numbers stack. And I was able to get the same package I had at Aspen, more training and support going there. And I really landed on my feet, and there was a level of reassurance that, do you know what, Colin, you're going to be fine. And I controlled what I could. I actually booked a fitness photo shoot for the June to give me a focus during my redundancy, because I don't like being idle, bro.
Thumbs, yeah.
I would have gone mad. So I booked that as a focus. I trained really, really hard. I updated my CV instantly. I was doing the interviews. After like 1 or 2 interviews, I felt supremely confident that I was going to land a role. The only concern was whether the role would be in Glasgow and I would have to travel somewhere. As it was, I ended up with the role in Glasgow. It was kind of Scotland, Glasgow, Edinburgh. And that was really reassuring that the skills that you've been building for the past 5-6 years, Colin, post-university, they are things that are going to serve you well in any future role. And you just need to find the right one to apply yourself in.
So there's a couple of things to this. Getting made redundant ever again in the future, you now have the confidence of that's not as big of a inconvenience that not that you weren't even making it out to be. Like, you very quickly, the resilience that you have at this point to go, right, here's what I'm going to do.
My family and friends were more worried than I was, Dale.
Yeah, it's usually
I remember my mum crying and my girlfriend at the time being like, oh my God, what are you going to do? And I've got a text on my phone, I've saved it. Do you know my friend Bryce Bell? He's the boy. When he's back allowed on social media, you can have a chat with him on this podcast. His mindset's incredible. We used to send each other these like daft, like motivational Snapchats, like sort of joking, but like sort of not. And I've sent him a text, and I sent it to my girlfriend at the time, and I sent it to my brother, I sent it to my mum and dad, and it was something like, bad news in the office today. This has happened, this has happened, this has happened. First things first, I've updated my CV. I'm sending it to Elaine, who recruited me for this place. I feel fine. There'll be challenges over the next few weeks, but I'm going to focus on my health and my fitness. I'm going to get a new job real soon. Don't worry. And I remember mum being like, how can you be this calm? And I was like, it's my job, and this is maybe like the whole toxic masculinity thing, but it's my job as the man to be strong, steady, resolute. Of course, I was allowed to be upset and like a bit shaken by it. And in quieter moments, I should have been able to like say to my brother, like, mate, that was horrible. But I decided, literally just told myself, I was like, it's going to be fine.
Where do you think that comes from? Do you think is the part of this is the fitness challenges that you've had, the micro adverse situations that you go through, going into the gym, can't lift that weight, can lift it now. On top of that, the confidence in your skill set and what you've been able to deliver. Like, I
think you're so right. I think if we were to split the percentages up there, it was 40% deciding to become the guy through lifting weights. Let's say another 40% being confident in my skill set, and then 20% the content I was consuming. So like Mindset with Muscle, Jamie Alderton, Body and the Beast. Who else was I consuming by that point in time? Modern Wisdom had started in 2018. So I was listening to that then as well. And I just felt that if I'm going to hold myself up, and I was posting online at that point in time as well, if I hold myself up as a guy that's really well put together and strong and resilient, then I should probably act like it. One of the biggest things I think is wrong in today's society, and the biggest challenge we have around mental health, is the gap between who we say we are and who we think we are and how we actually act. So if I say that I'm going to be a top 1% podcaster, I should probably keep producing episodes once a week with good quality clips, good quality thumbnails, good quality research, good quality questions. If I say I'm going to be a 7-figure sales guy, I should probably get on the phone and prospect and get new business meetings and put forward good proposals and close hard and sign things and negotiate at the right level. Otherwise, there's a gap and a delta between who I say I am and who I really am. And that gap is where we have so much unhappiness and unfulfilled potential that we're like, if only I tried to act like this better ideal myself. So in the same way, when I got made redundant, I could hold myself up online as good at sales, looked after my brain, looked after my body, progressing nicely in my career. Or I could go back into my shell and be like, oh no, like, woe is me, this is so hard. I just wanted to be the guy that I say I was.
Yeah. So I think you're very clear on the identity of who you were, or who you wanted to be.
Do you know what? I hadn't read Atomic Habits by that point, but Charles Duhigg has a book called Habits. He's now got a book called Super Communicators, which I'm really keen to read as well. It's called The Power of Habit. And I remember him talking about routines and habits reinforcing a personality.
Yeah.
And James Clear explain that better than anyone else, because he talked about identity and who you are in Atomic Habits. And I think that in the first year of the podcast, there should have been a klaxon every time I mentioned Atomic Habits, because it was so formative for me. Yeah. But I had that really clear in my mind that I needed to act in alignment with who I said I am. And if I didn't, then I'm a fake, I'm a fraud, and I'm not the guy that I said I was. And I really don't like that idea at all.
It questions your integrity on everything. Because if
So
that
true.
slips, where else does it slip? It bleeds over into every other
But it's
aspect
why
of life.
like see the crazy endurance challenges that you did. You told everyone you were going to do it. So guess what? Even at the time when you were basically borderline walking around the track at the end because you're feeling fucked, you were like, I'm doing this.
Well, you know what that experience taught me? Yes, to tell everyone that, but see, there was a voice inside my head that was saying to me, I can make up the excuse to stop this now because I've ran 80k. That's a good effort. I don't mind letting other people down, but the part of me in my brain that made me finish this event wasn't the judgment from everyone else. The judgment from myself was like, you said you would do this, so you're doing it. Like you have another gear to step into. And
Man of your word.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was what, off the back of that experience, I was like, well, like I hold my word very, very high. Like that is something that I need to make sure that, am I making sure? Because if I don't do this, there's going to be other days where don't podcast, don't release an episode, don't I don't know, create something for a client, or like it's going to bleed over into other areas.
There'll be
of life.
slippage in other areas, and I really believe that how you do anything is how you do everything, and it's one of those principles I've been teaching the guys I've been coaching for sales recently. So the first email you hit somebody with should be of a good quality. The first phone call you hit, the way you run your Zoom meeting, the presentation you send, there should be no spelling mistakes or any graphics out of place. You just constantly reinforce the image of you are who you say you are, and that's exactly what you're saying there. If today's the day that I skip my leg workout or I maybe cheat on my diet because I'm feeling a bit tired, then who knows what happens tomorrow. Maybe you do something else that's out of character. Maybe you don't post on Instagram like you said you were going to do. Maybe you don't message your client back when you said you'd give them a 24-hour reply. It's a slippery slope. Yeah.
And it's also like there's parts of that that's done in public, but what you do in silence is so powerful. And I know you talk about it like winning in silence and all that sort of stuff too.
Win offline to win online.
Yeah, I love that phrase.
Like, and I really think that, I think I see that with what you've built with the business. People nowadays see the lovely studio, the aesthetic gym, the podcast with 260 odd episodes, 270 episodes. So much goes on behind the scenes for you to be that guy. And if I think back to Dale 2-3 years ago when we met through Richard's Yes Academy, you were working your way to becoming that guy. And there were so many days you had to show up when you didn't want to become that guy.
It's crazy, isn't it? Right, so with the career side of things, I do want to talk about the stigma around 9 to 5s, especially in the world that we live in just now. But so this transition you made, this is the job that you're still in today, and you fast tracked to...
No, that's a really good point. I had to make a pivot.
Right, okay.
Because when I landed at Marsh, amazing place to be. The fast track was not very fast. It was 5 years to get to sales director. And the training that I got was absolutely amazing, but really slow in terms of what I was able to do in reality. I was the fourth in a 4-man team, which meant that the guys above me were older and quote unquote more experienced. And experience in the UK is a very different matter. I just released a clip of Callum White where he's talking about this, and he's talking about...
Okay, I'll check it out.
He was saying that in Dubai, one of the things he likes is that people just rate you for your ability rather than like, he's been a broker for 3 years. They're like, oh, but he's been a broker for a year and he's fucking good at it.
It used to frustrate me when I was like, this person is a master personal trainer because they've done it for 15 years. And it's like, yeah, but I've done it for a year and I've managed to fill my books. I filmed my books in 3 months. Like, surely that's...
And look at the results I've got. Look at the testimonials.
Yeah.
That's so much more important. So I'm a big believer that some people have 8 years experience of doing the same job for 8 years, or some people have 8 years experience of constantly leveling up and growing and expanding. And look at how your coaching business and look at how your coaching quality and service has improved over the years. There's coaches that have done it for 10 years that couldn't hold a candle to you in terms of the results you achieve or the impact you have. So who's more experienced? I would argue you are.
Yeah, because experience is a funny one, isn't it?
Yeah.
So these guys are getting put in front of you then. Because
they are. And it mean, and in a typical business development environment, in a business development team, you have a prospect list that you get allocated of companies to go after. And I was given the smaller companies or the ones that they'd worked on that they were like, we can't get
dead
in.
leads.
Have a go. Dead leads. Yeah, that's it. But you know what? The training I got was amazing.
Right.
And the guy that did my interview for bringing me in post the Aspen redundancy was the head of sales for the UK. And he's now actually the CEO of Marsh UK entirely.
Okay.
So he's a brilliant guy called Alistair Brighton. And he really backed me. He was like, I see something in you. I want you to come in. We don't actually have a role in Glasgow, but we're going to allocate budget from Birmingham for you to be here. Okay, amazing. But I was getting all this praise and support and encouragement from the London team in the head office, but in the Glasgow office and the Edinburgh office, I was getting these kind of shitty prospects to work on.
Yeah.
I was learning lots. I was really improving, but it was really slow. And in order for me to hit my target, it was just never going to happen. In my first year, they gave me a $5,000 discretionary bonus because they were like, you've been showing the right behaviors, but off your prospect list, you're never going to win enough business to make $5,000. And I was thinking, this is hellish. I got a $9,000 bonus at Ensley 14 months ago. What the fuck's going on here? I tried to move to bigger and better things. So the temptation became for me to look at other options. And my first boss in insurance was a guy called Alec McKenzie. And he'd moved from insurance to furniture in 2017. And the whole time he'd been keeping tabs on me and been like, Colin, you want to come and sell furniture? And I was like, no, furniture, not
like,
for me.
You don't exactly dream. Like,
yeah,
I'm going to make a killing and
even
furniture.
now, my brother jokes, he's like, you're DFS Campbell. I did a deal for sofas last year for 170 grand ex VAT. Wow. And my brother was like, DFS Campbell. And I was like, mate, the commission off that deal, we're going to Dubai, Habibi. But anyway, Alec kept tabs on me, and you'll find this as well. Anyone you work with over the years, and you'll find this with an Openreach in particular, there'll be particular managers that like, I'd love to work with Dale again. Or Dale was really good at that. I wonder if he wants to come and do this challenge next. So Alec kept tabs on me, kept on at me. I kept wanting to stay in insurance because I wore a blue suit to work. I got to go to the City of London on the flight to City. I got to go on the DLR.
Do you
I got
like
to
the
look
appearance of it, the aesthetics of the role as well?
It made you look like you were doing better than you were. Because you would stay at a nice hotel in Tower Bridge, you would get your meal out with work, and you'd be at a nice restaurant. But I was being stifled.
I was going to say that's usually an insecurity, isn't it? Where do you think that was kind of fostered from?
Perception. Everyone nowadays wants to look like they're doing well, and I don't judge anyone for that. But internal validation matters far, far more. And it wasn't enough to keep me satisfied, thank God. Yeah. Because, again, some people can stay in something because the optics look good, even though the reality's not. Like, how many relationships do you see that look maybe Instagram perfect? But then you know behind the scenes that he's messaging other birds, and she would happily leave him if she got a chance. If another guy who was higher status came in, she'd be gone. So I was getting frustrated. Alec had moved from one furniture provider to another one that was much, much bigger. The one that I'm at just now, they're called David Phillips, 50, 60 million pound turnover business. And he was like, look, we turn over 50, 60 million pounds. We're in a good spot. Our student division does 1 million. We have one big customer. And I was like, okay, you've got one customer doing £1 million, but you've got the operations, you've got the product from the Far East, you've got the manufacturing, you've got the customer service team that will arrange the delivery and stuff like that as well, but they don't have business development. And I was like, do you know what I'm good at? Business development. I'm good at opening the door to customers. So we had a proven product, a proven service, but we just didn't have the leads and the conversations to convert it. So the temptation became real. My good friend Dan, who I'd worked with at the company previously as well, was convinced by Alec to go and join. He'd been there since the October. Come the March, I was convinced that I was going to go as well. So I resigned, and I had a 3-month notice period at March. They put me in the naughty step. They were not fucking happy because they'd sort of they felt they'd rescued me from a redundancy. They'd given me a lot of training. They saw that I had a lot of potential, because even see with some of these dead leads, I was getting the door open to businesses.
I bet you were still like,
I was doing mad stuff, mate. I was doing videos. So because I'd been on social for a bit now, I was quite confident. So I would do a video down the lens. I'd be like, I won't tell you the business's name, but they're a big timber business in the UK. And I did and they'd been prospected. You could see on the CRM, the Salesforce, it was like, phoned on the 5th of July, phoned on the 12th of July, phoned on the 19th of July, these people, and getting nowhere. So I was like, right, I'll do something different. So I did a video down the lens where I had like a slide deck, and I'd be like, hi, whatever the guy's name is, we've been trying to get in front of you for many, many years now, but I'm going to do something a bit different today. I hope you don't mind. And I would do like a slide on what I know about your business, what I know about your industry, and the biggest risks facing the timber business, both from like a geopolitical perspective and a fiscal perspective. And then I would say, and the next slide would be about the insurance market. The insurance market, we expect rates to be going up on employee liability. We think we could get you a better deal on fleet, but we think you're going to a lot of trouble when it comes to your PI because of the way the market's going, the number of carriers that are writing that risk, right? And then the last slide would be like, I want to offer you a 30-minute consultancy with me and the leader from our London team who heads up the timber risk business. Please let me know what your availability is in the following dates. So I was booking meetings, doing this mad video because they were taking that sort of thing.
Box.
And do you know that particular one, right? You'd send it on Loom and you could see the number of views it got. And typically a video would get 1 or 2. Like the guy would maybe open it and then he would watch it another time and then he would choose whether he was going to take a meeting with you or not. I remember not having an email back from this guy for like a week and being like, I wonder if he's watched it, clicked through. 38 views. My heart went through my arse. I was like, what have I said on this video that it's been sent?
It's in the group chats.
Yeah, exactly. Or maybe I've not clicked off the video and he's seen me like walking away out of my bedroom in my flat and then come back in and maybe I've made a mess. I phoned him and I was like, hi, insert name. I hope you enjoyed my video. In fact, I see you've watched it a lot. And he was like, Colin, that is the single best piece of material I've been sent in my 20 years here as a director. And I was like, okay, so you want to book a meeting with me then? That's good news. What's your diary like? And then he said in it, and he was like, and I just want to say to you about that video, what gave you the idea to do that? And I was like, well, some of the guys in our other teams have done it. I do some stuff on social media around health and mindset. So I've got a bit of practice on camera. He's like, you were really good. I'm really impressed. So much so that I sent it to my sales team and said, why are we not doing this? So that was where the views had come from. So I was a bit relieved, but I was doing well with these prospects, but I never had a chance really to make it where I wanted to make it to. Whereas when I moved to David Phillips, we had a proven product, a proven service. We just needed to do the prospecting. And that's where maybe more people online now know the sort of figures that I've been doing in that job, where I've just been going boom, boom, boom. So my first year, between May and September is when typically we make most of our deliveries. I did something like 280 grand ex VAT. So it was probably the most revenue I generated for a business before, but I knew there was more. The next year I did 850. The year after that, I did 1.1. And then this year just finished on the 1st of April there, did 1.7. And that's all ex VAT as well. So you can add 20% of it on to fluff my figures up. But I ended up, and this is a phrase that I use a lot, right salesman, right vehicle. And you can also have right entrepreneur, right vehicle. So I could say to you that, Dale, what you're doing with the podcast studio is amazing. Is this the right vehicle for you to continue to scale? And you could be like, yes, because I'm going to add a producer full time and do this as well. Equally, you could speak to somebody and be like, is joinery business the right vehicle for you? Oh, well, yeah, because you can scale, because I can bring on more teams. But somebody's other answer might be no, because there might be no headroom. So for example, I know somebody that recently pivoted from doing a clothing brand. They had all the skills and all the aptitude to be really successful in business, but guess what? The overheads were killing them. So now he's doing drop shipping of a different product, and he's actually drop shipping some clothing as well, because he knows that he doesn't have to have the overheads. So right salesman, right vehicle, right entrepreneur, right vehicle. And that was what I proved over those last 3-4 years of being here, where I used the skill set that I already built up previously, but in the right arena to really fiscally drive money for the company. And of course, selfishly, off the back of it for me, been incredible.
Which is amazing. It pays off massively. It has paid off massively. You said something about this guy sending this to his sales team. Did that plant a seed in your head to say, you're good at sales? When do you start realising that, actually, I can do something with this?
I needed to prove myself at a company and do that's serious revenue. So I knew that, and then it was that was probably around the same time that I went and did that shoot and hustle when I with Hustle in London, when I spoke down the lens, and I was like, I'm quite good at this presenting thing.
Are you podcast? No, podcasting
not yet. Not yet. Okay. I was close to podcasting. I'd been a guest on 5 or 6.
That was it.
All kind of fitness ones, all kind of mindset ones, where I was speaking about traveling around the UK as a sales guy and being in shape and how the mind follows the body and all those sorts of concepts.
Did you have a vision in your mind of, I could do this? Like I could really do this from my own track record, something that I can look back on, something that I can also help other people with.
I loved the format of podcasting, and I loved the format of speaking to the camera for those videos. And I thought, there's a little bit of a natural aptitude here, and with a bit of practice, I could get really good at it. And then the whole phrase, and I didn't have it mapped out, but if not me, then who? Or if not you, then who? Because I looked up to the likes of Chris Williamson. I looked up to the likes of, who else did I listen to at that time? Jamie Alderton. And I thought, oh, these guys are way ahead of me in terms of like what they've achieved in their life and what they've done. But I can just create a version that's suitable for me. Absolutely, or people that are like me, or maybe 1 or 2 steps behind me, or younger guys in Scotland or younger guys in England that want to try and get like that.
So podcast aside, just now on the whole role of the 9 to 5, albeit that's not the exact hours you do, but people can grasp what we're meaning when we talk about that, or corporate lifestyle. The world that we live in just now, very entrepreneurial, do your own thing, set up your own business. You've got a lot of fulfillment and a lot of passion from growing someone else's business. Let's kind of talk about that, because I think it's very misunderstood that you can't gain fulfillment or you can't be happy. So talk us through, like, what are some things that someone would need to see in the role that they're doing, or maybe need to consider if they want to stay within it?
Amazing question, because I think this is done so wrong. Not everyone should or can be an entrepreneur. And you can, in the right roles, find incredible stimulation and fulfillment from being part of something purposeful. Typically, that means that you're selling or involved in something that's delivering to customers or clients that has a positive impact, and you know it does. You must believe in it. You must feel like there's an element of progress as well. It's a Tony Robbins quote, but David Hatt often claims that progress is happiness.
Yeah.
He said it on my podcast, and I was like, oh, as David Hatt says, and then I Googled it, and it's Tony Robbins. The best of us pilfer stuff from other places. And there must be an element of progress, whether that's, we want to do 2 million revenue next year, or we want to grow our customer base from 40 to 50, or we want to improve the profit margin from 40% to 50%, or we want to improve our customer experience scores from 4.5 stars to 5 stars.
Yeah.
There must be an element of, you can tie what it is that you do between 9 to 5 or how many hours you work and the impact on the customer base and the impact on the business. If there's not a story or some metrics, whether it's qualitative or quantitative, that ties to what you've done, then I can see why people get lost. The biggest challenge, I think, in businesses is when you're too far removed from the customer base to see what happens when somebody uses your product. I'm a big believer in the afters concept. This was the biggest thing, maybe second biggest thing, that I was taught at Marsh in their sales academy. It was all built by a guy called Andy Bounds. He's a sales trainer from the world between Liverpool and Manchester. Bald, shouty guy, but really, really good at what he does. And he talks about afters. Customers don't care about you in your past. They care about them in their future. So stop talking about, we're Bulletproof Studios, founded in 2021, and we have 2 podcast rooms. Instead, talk about, we help you produce high quality audio and video so that you can tell your story and share your perspectives to your audience. We've now talked about the after effect of dealing with you, rather than the fact that you've got 2 studios with 3 Rode mics and 3 camera setup or whatever else we've got. We're talking about the actual value of the exchange.
And how much does that show up in podcasting and interviews?
All the time.
People don't want to. This is often a gripe as well when I listen to podcasts. Someone talking about their story all the time. It's like, let the guest speak. You're on their show.
You do that really well, though, don't you?
Because it's something I've been very conscientious of, especially when you edit podcasts for
many other people. Yeah.
It's like, you can see how long the host is talking. And I was like, if the host is talking more than the guest, that's a metric I'm going to now apply to my own podcast. I want to make sure that their waveforms show up more than But mine.
You do that really well, because every example you've brought about maybe your experience at OpenReach or your experience with your family, you mentioned your parents' divorce, has been relevant for me to tell more about mine. And that's the same thing that I do in my show. You give a little bit to give context to something, and then we carry on. And it's, again, I think Rogan has a position where he's allowed to be the guy that speaks a lot because of what he's built, but other podcast hosts should not try and be Joe Rogan. They should try and be
We should all have our own style, but then on the flip side of that, it can be very robotic. It's like, okay, Colin, what do you think about this? Yeah. And then you tell the story, you don't dig deeper that's the whole point of me bringing in those stories.
And that's a skill you've built. You've acquired it over time.
So the podcasting side of things then, getting Chris Williamson on for the first guest, that must feel, at the time, did it feel like, oh my God, this is a pretty cool experience?
It felt massive. So March 2020, we go into lockdown. I'd been threatening to start a podcast since the July before, because I'd been a guest on 5 or 6. I bought a new laptop after the one that I had at university sounded like an airplane when it was taking off. It was absolutely fucked. I bought a microphone and I bought a Logitech webcam. And I downloaded, I think it was Anchor at the time, which is now called Spotify for podcasters. And I remember just threatening to start one. And then when the lockdown came, obviously so much time opened up. So I was like, right, okay, it's time to start. I did 6 that I'd recorded with just people in my network that I knew. People from like the kind of health and fitness scene, a guy that had a clothing brand called Jock Rintoul, who great guy as well from Scotland. And I was thinking, I probably need somebody to launch the podcast from not from an ego perspective, from like a validation of like the concept perspective.
Got you.
And I was thinking, who could it be? And I'd been a long time listener to Modern Wisdom from the early days in 2018. And as you saw with my Instagram, I would share podcasts to my story or my grid to be like, I'm listening to this. And the stage he was at with his audience size, probably not dissimilar to where I'm at now in 2025. If somebody shares and tags, I will message them back, be like, thank you for sharing it. Really appreciate that. If there's anyone your friends and family think would benefit, or like, please let me know if there's any other guests you'd like to hear from.
That's sales skill.
So he would message me and be like, thanks for sharing it, bro. Hope you enjoyed it. I've got such and such coming up. I hope you enjoy it, or is there anyone you've been listening to on other podcasts you think would be good on my show? I was like giving him feedback, not in like a telling him what to do, but I was like his ideal customer, wasn't I?
Yeah, engaged.
So we had each other in the DMs, didn't follow me back or anything like that. And I messaged him to be like, hey, Chris, massively inspired by what you've done with Modern Wisdom. I've been threatening to start a podcast for the last 6 months. I'm finally doing it. I have 5 episodes recorded, but I would love for you to be the launch episode. No hard feelings. If not, here's the sort of things that I think we could talk about. And he was like, hey, man, yeah, we'd love to come on. We're all locked inside. Let's do 2 hours next Monday. Was
that nerve-wracking to send that? Or were you pretty...
My sales background meant that I was quite confident on the structure of my message, and I felt I got everything across. Plus, we'd spoken back and forth before, and the worst he could say was, hey, I'm not doing any podcasts right now. Maybe we do one in 6 months' time. Like a soft no. But he was really polite, and yeah, we started with a bang. And the Chris Williamson that you see nowadays, that everyone is aware of, he was really good back then as well. He just hadn't broken through the surface yet.
Yeah, it was just market. Just the
that's
market
right.
exploding.
He hadn't moved to the US as well, which was a big factor in why he's done what he's done.
Do you think that's one of the biggest things that's...
Yeah, environment matters. He's now in person with a lot of people in Austin. He's been on Rogan.
Yeah.
He's just proven himself over and over and over again.
Yeah, yes, he is the podcast guy.
That's right.
So bringing this, so the podcast is an idea, becomes something. You're thriving in this 9-to-5 role alongside. And I know you've been not in and out of the podcasting side of things, but from a headspace point of view, where does the first challenge come up with you second guessing, is this the thing I should be doing?
Yeah. I think the first time that I was unsure about it, I did 20 episodes in the first 10 weeks. I did 2 a week because it literally, you could speak to back then if I...
Yeah, lockdown was crazy, but I wish I started podcasting then, but it seemed to be like a wild podcast. Everyone was
so
just
many
wanting to speak.
So many, but so many failed as well. I think the failure rate then was even higher than it is now, albeit they maybe went for like 15, 20 episodes rather than like 3 or 8, which is the kind of classic fall off now, because there was the ability to just keep recording. So it went really well. I was really loving it. The momentum felt good, and the listener numbers were growing, and the feedback you were getting was so much deeper than even like your most impactful Instagram post.
Oh, really?
So your most impactful Instagram post, somebody like, mate, that was amazing. I now track my macros and I go for a walk in the morning to help my mind and my body and my digestion before I start the day. I'd be like, okay, amazing, bro, thank you. Whereas I do like an episode on men's mental health, or I do an episode on sleep, or I'm doing it with... I had a Stanford professor on after like 20 episodes about sleep.
Yeah,
she's so good. Nora Simpson, what a lady. And it was the messages I was getting were so impactful, and people were going through a weird time at that period of time. The government were trying to terrify you out your skin about this floating flu virus that was killing people in the street in Italy, and it was unusual. Like, we didn't have the same support network, so the podcast was maybe part of that. People feeling like it was a bit familiar, like. A lot of young Scottish guys, or a lot of young British guys anyway, were the kind of main people that I spoke to at the start. So that felt amazing. I remember getting to like, I can't remember how long it took me to get to like between like episode 90 and 100. And I remember writing to probably 5 or 6 guests that I thought, oh, they would be really good for like my 100th episode, to be like, to really mark the occasion. And I remember just getting like either blanked or no's, and I had a thorough process of first message, my follow-up, and then my third follow-up when I would basically then leave it. Sales skills again. Yeah. And I remember being like, if I can never get these guests, then maybe I'll never make the show any bigger. And that was a realization as well. Like, do you want it to be a big show, or are you just happy to be producing what you're producing? And the answer was I was happy to be what I was producing, because I kept going and I kept enjoying it, because I can't remember some of the episodes between that gap, but the stimulus of having a conversation with somebody new every week about something I was interested in was more than enough for me than being like, okay, I'm going to have James Smith on for episode 100, or I'm going to have Ollie Marchand on for episode 100, or I'm going to have insert whoever else on for episode 100. That didn't really deter me. So that was like a tipping point to be like, even if it never grows any bigger than this, and we still have these impactful conversations that I enjoy, and I feel like several hundred people at that point in time were enjoying as well, then we just keep cracking on.
Well, it's a good metric to hold yourself to, because if you compare it to bigger guests, bigger audience, where's next? What's 200 look like? What does 300 look like? And it's almost like the upgrading your car, the materialistic things. It can only get nicer and more expensive until, and look, you still enjoy those things, but if that's the metric that you hold yourself to, then it becomes very challenging to actually see the worth in it.
I've always been really process driven, so I just knew keep showing up. So between episode 90 and 100, I remember being like, oh, a bit weird. And the world was starting to open up a little bit then. So studios started to become a thing. And I was like, oh, wow, I'm going to have to spend quite a lot of money on studios. That's a bit daunting because there was no, like, I mean, I think I'd had maybe like 4 or 5 sponsors in the podcast that were just like friends with companies that maybe wanted to advertise a little bit something, or they were like, oh, cool, I'll support your podcast. Here's 50 quid to pay for your graphics that you do for the thumbnail and stuff like that as well. So I was like, oh, cool, amazing. But then when the studios were opening back up and you were spending like between like 60 or 150 quid on a studio, back then the cost varied massively. And I was like, oh, wow, this is going to be like quite expensive. I need to commit to this and I need to know my why. And my why was always, I feel like I can contribute to this platform. I feel I can ask great questions from people. I think I can ask questions of people who come on my show, even if they've been on other shows that they maybe haven't been asked before, or I think they can maybe open up more or deliver more value on my show, one of the two, or both ideally. And it just kept me going from that perspective. So that was like a tipping point. And then there was another tipping point a little bit later down the line where I was spending a lot of money on studios and production. And I went for something like 4 or 5 months without a sponsor because I had intermittent sponsors that are a really good fit for the show, but they weren't something like, look, we want to book a block of 10, Colin. And I was like, oh, I'm spending more money than the show's bringing in. And I just have to consider, do I keep feeding the machine because of what it does off the back of it? And off the back of it, 1, for my own enjoyment. 2, my personal brand has never been stronger and people will come up to me. And David Lloyd this morning got out of the sauna and a guy went, oh, hi, mate, I listened to your episode with...
So surreal, isn't it?
Yeah, mate, it was mad. He was like, I listened to your episode with The Critical Drinker. It came up in my YouTube suggestion. Now, that's one of my most played episodes, so I understand why. But he was like, I didn't realise you have 300 podcasts, mate. I see you in here all the time. And I was like, yeah, mate, class. And, mate, it felt really cool, right?
It's not in financial currency, but it shows up in other areas.
Yeah, and that guy... again, we don't need to talk about something that a lot of people say to me, but people will tell me stuff about like, I've been listening to your podcast when this happened in my life and it's been really, really helpful. Or actually I listened to this podcast and I've started this business idea, or actually I've enrolled in this training and I'm like, whoa, that is unbelievable. So personal brand, network. So the number of guests that I've become either really good friends with, or we've actually done some sort of business together as well, has been untold. And that's much more than getting a few £100 from a sponsor to put on the episode. My own self-development, prepping for guests across different industries has made me so much more knowledgeable and a bit of an encyclopedia. And then there's the kind of 4th strand, which my communication skills have just leveled up and up and up and up.
There's no better way to watch yourself back on camera and go, I explained it, or I asked that question that way. You mentioned earlier, I didn't pick up on it, but the ums and ahs type of thing as well. Like, you are very good at that, and that's something I've always observed from the content you put out. There's a speaker, what's his name? He helps people with their communication, that sort of stuff.
Is it Vin Gang?
Yeah. His stuff's really good. And
I would love to get him on the podcast.
Yeah, he was on Stephen Bartlett's recently, and that segment that he done, I was like, wow, I need to. And I always look back at mine, I'm like, I need to stop saying the ums and ahs. And I remember you saying it's something that you've worked on very heavily, and it's just part of your vocabulary now. It's how you speak, how you communicate. But you have no better way of developing that skill than recording yourself, whether you put out the episode or not. But sitting down in front of a camera and record, such a great little tool. So the podcast growing then and getting all that value, your sales career in the quote unquote corporate world, again evolving alongside these paths, pretty much taking off. Do you ever feel pressure to quit one and go all in on the other?
They have complementary skills, but they have competing time, of course. What's good about sales in the career that I'm in is that the first 2 years I was in the trenches because they gave me no customers when I came in, I had no clients, so I had to build that up. The client book that I have now, so some of the people that spent as part of that 280 grand in year 1, they're still spending now. Because in sales, it's quite, it's not always the case, but crude phrase, but I eat what I kill. So if I bring in a client, I keep the client. I look after them. I account manage them. Some salespeople don't like to do that, but I like to make sure they have the experience the whole way through with me.
You control the relationship and the perception of what they see of your business.
Yeah, that's right. And that can be advantageous and disadvantageous because it means that I don't have as much bandwidth to go and win another new one, but I'd rather make sure that customers sticky when they stay with me. So one of the universities, I think they spent something like 15, 20 grand in that first year. Across the last 4 years, they've spent over 100 grand every single year.
They've grown.
Because they've actually just agreed to do more with me.
Oh, right, okay.
So in year one, they're like, Colin, chuck you these 50 mattresses to see what your quality product like, see what your quality service is like. And year two, I'm like, Joe, we did a really good job on the mattresses last summer. I'd love to do the whole mattresses for your portfolio, but what do you do for your desk chairs? Or what do you do for your sofas? Or actually, you mentioned to me that you had breakages in your dining chairs last year. Let me do 1 block's worth of dining chairs this summer, and then next summer you give me the full dining chairs if I do a good job. I'm a big believer in momentum. Also, you can see me, I go sales mode, don't I? Like I'm negotiating. And that's a really, really good thing in sales. But in terms of the two, there's less time pressure on me in my day job than there's ever been because of the client book that I've built up, which means I have more bandwidth for other things. And also, my skill level is better now that it takes me less time, 1, to prepare for a podcast, and 2, to do my sales job. If you give me a list of 5 clients to phone, back in 5-10 years ago, I would have taken a lot longer to plot out what I'm going to say to those 5 people and how I'm going to say it. Whereas now I'm like, okay, cool. I'm going to look on their website for 2 minutes. I'm going to look at their social media for 2 minutes. I'm going to look at their company's house accounts for 2 minutes. I'm going to look at who she knows on LinkedIn. Give me the phone.
Yeah, good.
So I can do it really, really quick. And I can. It's more of my prospecting and outreach approach now is more of a sniper than the machine gun. Now I'm like, okay, I want to speak to that client, and I just won a client now who's got 16 sites across the UK. It's going to be a lot of revenue for us for this summer. I maybe made like 3 phone calls to get in the door on that.
Yeah.
And then the discovery meetings were a bit more arduous. So my time is more efficient than ever before. Is there pressure for me to go all in on one? You and I have spoken about this before. It's actually not possible to go all in on podcasting in Scotland unless you have James English is probably the only one. Do you know anyone else that's full time?
Yeah.
Maybe the open goal guys, maybe the football ones.
Yeah, I think they all still have
side hustles.
Some like other gigs that's maybe in the realm of it plays advantageous to the podcasting.
If I was to go all in on the podcast, I would have to do my sales coaching fully on the side with it to fund it. Or to, for example, we can speak about it, but brands that I've worked with on the podcast, I use that to reinvest back into the studios, back into the clips, back into the production, back into flying to Dubai to do a run of 5 episodes. I'm in London next week where I'm paying for the studios, I'm paying for my travel down there so I can keep producing and feeding the listenership and giving them what they want. You need to have something on the side of that funds it or is directly related. And so
what's the product that you pitch on it? Because it's a free consumption unless like Spotify's never going to kind of pay or YouTube monetization. It's like pretty low on that side of things as well. It's an hour and a half of content as opposed to the short form stuff. It's wild.
Yeah, that's right. So have I felt the pressure to do one or the other? Not at this moment in time. I still get a big buzz, and again, how my role is structured between July and September, I will do big numbers again. So I'll earn big commission again. It would be mad unless something goes very, very wrong for me to walk away during that period. And again, I'm sure my employer's not listening, but even if they are, by November next year, I think I'll be more of a position where I will consider how much of my time I spend on Campbell versus how much I spend on my time on corporate. And I don't say that as somebody who's like, the corporate world's crap. As you said, I love finding the job that I'm good at, that I get fulfillment from, that fiscally rewards me, that stimulates me, that pushes me on. But in the last 6 months in particular, I did my first sales coaching role in November 2022. A business wanted me to come and be their head of business development, but the numbers just didn't stack. They were like, "Oh, your target would be like 300k," and I'm like, "How are you paying me 100k if I'm bringing in 300?" So I was like, "I'll coach your team to sell like me," and he was like, "Yeah, cool, let's do it." Okay, amazing. But in the last 6 months, I've been doing that a lot more. I've worked with 15 guys one-to-one and probably 5 companies. So in the first quarter of the year, I've done like maybe 20 different clients, and I love doing it. And I'm getting a really tangible result for the people off the back of it. And in a different way from the fitness side of things, which I maybe struggled with as a coach in the very brief, a very brief experiment my brother and I had in it when we had Cambrose as a brand. It just feels a better fit for me. And it feels like I can have a really, really
we can see
big
your
impact.
passion behind it as well, and the meticulous parts of the process that you've trialed and tested and went through experience with. And the experience is another thing as well, because it's not just experience of in your fitness journey, it's how you've developed your body. It's different when you develop other people's body, that you've developed your skill of sales, but in turn, that is other people's experience through sales, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I've got loads of frameworks that make it a lot easier. I did a talk in January at This Is Wealth, which is a group of property investors in Scotland, and a person pulled me aside afterwards and were like, that was really helpful that you've got a format for your outbound messages called the 3 Whys, because it means I can always remember that. Whereas I could be like, you need to start your email talking about them, then you talk about you, then you talk about the timings involved. That's okay, but I'm like, no, it's called why me, why you, why now? And they're like, all right, cool, I can follow that. So having a name or a framework or a label for something really helps people. So in the same way, my discovery meetings are the 3 Ls, and people are like, oh, okay. I was like, okay, how did your discovery meeting go, Dale? Oh, yeah, it went okay. Like, I feel like I gathered a good bit of intel. I'm like, okay, did you follow the 3 Ls? Well, the last L, I don't think I really leveraged things that well. Okay, cool. Well, that's what we're going to pray for next time. By having things that we can fall back on, much myself. In the same way, you can be like, did you track your sleep? Did you track your macros? Did you track your training? Did you get into a parasympathetic state before you went to bed? Like, again, all these different things we can do.
What's really interesting here is when we talk about personal brand, a lot of people think that is just for entrepreneurs. And you're a fantastic example of the personal branding is everything's personal, individualized to every single person, and it's worth having, because look what this has done in terms of the career opportunities, the doors it's open for the prospects that you've ended up speaking to. Because I'd imagine some of the wins that you've had is, oh, what are you doing on LinkedIn? Let's have it. Oh, well, just get a podcast, and there'll be crossover of what you've done in that podcast format as well.
Dale, crazy. Because we sell into student accommodation, I did a couple of deals with portfolio landlords that are just people on LinkedIn that are just talking about their business and their property business, but they've got like 50 student houses, or even, again, I've done smaller stuff. Christy L from this neck of the woods, I was speaking to one of the guys that he gets on well with, and they've got like 3 student houses, but they need new beds and mattresses in the summer because students fuck them up, believe me. So it is really good from that perspective as well. LinkedIn is so good as a sales tool because you position yourself as your personal brand. And even me talking about where I was in my career, so when I made the move from insurance to furniture, I was updating all the time about 3 months in, I now understand the spec on this mattress and the spec on this desk chair. It'd be great to have a conversation with you. So people were kind of bought into the journey that I was like learning about this new industry. And I guess that's something I want to get on the record as well. One of the biggest reasons for my success in furniture is that I became a subject matter expert as well. So I really, really understand the fabrics, the supply chain, the materials, because in student accommodation, things need to be of a particular compliance level. Otherwise, they can't install it. And it needs to be a particular level of durability. So I needed to become a bit of a geek on the product. Yeah. But it meant that I'm really credible. Some of my customers aren't particularly knowledgeable, but some of them will be like, oh, Colin, we had like a wishbone spring under our sofa last year and it broke. What's under yours? And I'm like, okay, no problem at all. Let me just show you how our Cherie is structured and I'll talk you through why this one's more durable than that one. If I couldn't do that, they're not going to go with me. But if I can, they're like, do you know that Colin guy? He really knows his stuff. Yeah. I know he's high energy and I know he's going to get the job done and I know he's going to make sure the delivery times all work and his team are really efficient. But actually, he can tell me exactly the product span, the warranty, everything that comes with it. And that is really invaluable.
It's the one skill I see is you always get the Instagram DMs that I'm a closer, I could close for your business. It's like, yeah, anyone can, but that's the difference between someone who's really good at the role is being that subject matter expert, knows the ins and outs of everything when it comes to the product. Funny enough, like just a memory came back to us there when I was running. I never had a sales team, but we moved businesses from premise A to premise B. And there was opportunities to upsell. And for the upsell, like it wasn't commission, but you got like 20 quid for this, 30 quid. Like, it was like setting it, and you could make an absolute killing with that. The guys who done well was the guys who knew the product inside out. And then on top of the other skills, like play their part.
I say this, and I sometimes get a bit of heat for this online, but I would rather be trusted than liked in sales. So the guys there were trusted that they knew about the product rather than like, oh, he was really fun to talk to, or he asked me about the football. My clients sometimes will speak to me about, they know I'm into golf, they know I'm a Rangers fan, they know I live up in Scotland, they know I'm into my health and fitness, they know that I go on holiday to Dubai sometimes, but they are much more valuable to me and I to them that they know that I deliver their furniture on time, on budget, on spec. Yeah. They're like, I can trust him. So even if they didn't like me, they'd be like, but I want to work with him because he knows what he's doing.
Yeah.
So those guys in the call center, they knew what they were doing about the product. They maybe didn't build the best rapport, but the client was still like, oh yeah, that makes sense for me to upgrade.
It's trust. Trust is the main thing, isn't it? Why do you think people want to try and quit that 9-to-5 world then?
Social media has a big role to play, doesn't it? It glamorizes the hustle and the bustle of entrepreneurship and the relative freedom it can sometimes bring. I think employers had to wake up post the C19 period about the flexibility of work from home in the office. And I think a lot of employers have got that balance right now. Some have probably still got it wrong. Yeah. I think the idea that you should have to book annual leave to go on a dentist appointment or go to the doctor or something like that is
long gone.
Just insane. Yeah. And you hope that no companies have that. But the element of, you can work for yourself, etc., that is a big driver, and the freedom element. But I can tell you, even from like juggling stuff on the side myself, there are times where you just wish you could switch off at 5 o'clock and not think about things too much. And there is a cost to not being able to do that. And I've willingly embraced that because I'm doing it out of not necessity.
You've got one foot in that world, yeah. That's
right. And even last night, one of my coaching calls moved from 6 p.m. to next Monday, and Monday's a bank holiday. So I'm like, I wonder if I'll do it. But of course I'll do it because I want to. So that's like the entrepreneurial side. You have to be willing to do to do stuff in that regard. And bank holidays aren't real in the entrepreneurial world. So I think there's a big draw from the freedom aspect. I think people need to understand what the reality looks like. And the grass isn't always greener. The grass is green where you water it. So I believe that if you were to be in a 9-to-5 that really fulfills you, that might be a better choice than you maybe having a business that you don't love, but you feel like you've got a bit more time freedom on. I also think the situation in the UK with tax is making more people consider that as well. I know as a PAYE employee, I'm really, really not doing well in the UK. There's a particular bracket in the UK where you earn there's a 25 grand bracket between it. You are being taxed at effectively 62%.
It's wild, yeah.
So that is not a position I want to be in. And again, somebody was saying to me the other day, you should put all of that into your pension. I'm thinking, yes, I should, but I feel like I shouldn't have to do jiggery pokery to financially not get fucked by the government. So there's an element of people are being drawn to entrepreneurship because they know it's more tax efficient. If you pay yourself, for example, if you pay yourself a 48k salary as within your own company, you're paying something like 3.5 grand tax. That's a lot more efficient than if you're doing it as PAYE, right? So there's that element, and there's just the general narrative as well that working for people shit, but it's what job you have, I think. Yeah,
and it's also the character of who you are as well. I think is something needs to be said, like to hold the mirror up. Who's the type of person are you being within this business? Because at the end of the day, it's a business that. Speaking of business, actually, this was something that I went to Factory Weights, got some dumbbells and that sort of stuff, and they gave us 2 extra lots of everything. And I was like, wonder if people would have kept this. So I messaged him, I was like, look, you've sent us that sort of stuff, and going back and forth with the guy, and it's quite interesting that a lot of people say, yeah, just take it. It's like, I wonder if that comes from the entrepreneurial side of me, or is that the character? And like a lot of people say, that's just because you've got a business that you're giving that back. Anyone would have taken that. It's like, no, that there is a part of that integrity and the character that you built.
I think they both contribute. Maybe there's a percentage. Maybe it's 80% character, 20% the fact that you're like, if that was my business, I would hope that somebody would do the same.
Yeah. Which is and it feels good. Good karma. Good karma is always going to come back.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. Exactly that. I think the entrepreneurial draw is so strong for some people, but don't get rose tinted glasses about what it might actually look like. There are times, and I'm sure you can speak to this, there's times where you wouldn't wish it on your worst enemy, the stress, but then there's times where you're like, I'm flying and I could never get this feeling or this level of success in the day job.
And I think it's all part of your own experience of what you do for your own bias. I would bet that the path that you're going down will lead to something that is maybe more your own thing. As it grows, and as more importantly, it ticks the boxes of what you're looking to tick.
I think it's coming. I'm not in a rush, and I think that helps.
That's a massive advantage.
It's an advantage in that I come from an abundant perspective. So I'm never going to sell out and sell something and push something that I don't believe in. But the Ragent Beta paradox is that sometimes a situation needs to be worse for you to take action. So if you're in a relationship and it's only okay. She doesn't cheat on me, or we don't actually physically fight, but I don't really love her anymore, you stay in it because it's not the worst. Whereas if she came home steaming one night and you end up throwing hands at each other, it's over, isn't it? It's completely done. In the same way, if you're in a job and your manager's verbally abusing you and you're going home at night crying and you're stressed and your hair's falling out and you're ill, you're going to leave that job faster and push the side hustle faster. Whereas if I'm in a position where I feel like I'm enjoying my work that I'm doing, I feel like I'm contributing, I feel like I'm earning well, I'm less inclined to be like, I need to turn the sales coaching full time ASAP. But I feel like I'm in a good spot where I'm pulling away from something that I feel like is fine and it's doing well, but I'm pulling towards something and pushing towards something that, while it feels great, it's remunerating me well, and I feel like I can be really good at it as well. It's the same as the podcast in 2020. I feel like in a few years' time, people will be like, whoa, he's really good at that, or he is in an arena where he's standing out to a good level. And that's what I've done with podcasting. And I think that's what I'm going to do with sales coaching in the near future.
I like it. Do you feel fulfilled just now?
Yeah, I wake up every day like, let's go. It's not that, no, sorry, that's not every day, but the vast majority of days I'm looking forward to what I'm doing. I'm looking forward to the sales call I'm doing. I'm looking forward to the proposal meeting I'm doing for my day job. I'm looking forward to the sales coaching client I've got. I actually even look forward to making the slides for some of my sales coaching clients, and I hate making slides.
You are a robot.
do you know what? See if I could find somebody that can make my Canva stuff look better, and I could just like dictate and be like, okay, I want this slide to talk about objection handling, and I want
ChatGPT is coming, man. It's coming.
I hope so.
The most recent updates is there.
So I feel fulfilled doing that. I still love my training. I love my golf. Albeit we lost last night, I like watching Rangers with my friends. I'm doing so much stuff that feels great, and I feel like a sense of purpose when I'm doing it, Dale.
Is there anything that you look to the future that you're maybe a bit worried about? Anything that worries you? So you mentioned obviously where you live, like the tax. I'd imagine that's a big part. Now you are into your politics, and you're very clued up and passionate about communicating your views in that. How do you see that changing?
The UK is in a really tricky position where the wider Western world is waking up to the reality of globalist and potentially pseudo-communist politics that we're experiencing in the UK with the Labour government, and the previous Conservative administration as well was nobody to be proud of or pleased about. But we're in an electoral cycle where we have another almost 4 years of the Labour government, so the damage that could do to the UK economy and the UK society and the fabric of our society could be borderline irreparable, which that really, really concerns me. And I feel like I should stay in, not fight, but push back and be vocal and try and encourage people to look at alternatives and encourage people to take personal responsibility to do what they can. But if the macro factors above us are so bad and the safety of our country continues to degenerate due to some of the considerations that we're making in the stripping away of a fabric of our society and our values society, and a police force that's able to support that, then that could be really, really worrying. That is something that is on my mind. I try and unplug from it a little bit, but at the same time, I'm clued up enough to be like, this is a problem, this is a problem, this is a problem. We need to wake up faster, because again, Trump is so far from perfect. Don't let me try and tell you otherwise. But he was a swing of a hammer by the American people to be like, enough is enough of this woke shit. Let's stop. Let's push back. Let's have lower taxes, more freedom, control over immigration. Let's not be in these forever wars across the world. The UK probably feels the same, but we don't have a hammer to swing yet. Yeah. Because the Conservatives, Labour, SNP, Liberals, they're all the same.
Dancing around the same thing.
They're all the same. They're all the same. And even when the people do vote for something, they do want something, the government don't always give you it in the way that you want it. And Trump's finding that at the moment. He's finding some stuff hard to get through as well. And again, I'm not going to hold him up as any sort of like the answer, but he was the answer that the American people had to the question they were getting, which is, do you want more of the same? They were like, fuck no. And at the moment, I think a lot of people in the UK are looking around and being like, I do not want this to continue, but there's nobody to be like,
is there anyone at all?
Reform are holding themselves up as doing that. Okay. So that's Nigel Farage's party, albeit they've got infighting, and it's just typical, like they're tearing each other apart.
And you mentioned the brand earlier right at the start. So again, the brand of
it's new.
Nigel, like not of him.
Good point.
As the personal brand can sometimes taint.
It can because he's associated with Brexit, which again I was in favour of Brexit with the principles of it, but the implementation of it absolutely terrible, and he could be associated with that. Albeit I think he's gone through enough of a bit of a refresh, and he's huge on TikTok. I don't know if you know this, but so he was Gen Z love him.
Was he on I'm a Celebrity?
I think he must have been, yeah. And he came across. I think he was. He came across well because he's more of a man of the people than some of the politicians that we've got. So we'll see where he ends up, but I think it's gonna have to supersede and outgrow him. And you are right, there's gonna need to be somebody new that isn't associated with previous things. The person that a lot of people are talking about is Ant Middleton, actually, who was on Who Dares Wins.
I was literally just about to say, sometimes he needs to swing to more of a celebrity figure, somebody with a liking.
Like a Trump. Trump wasn't a politician.
Yeah.
Musk is not a politician. And Musk also can't get elected because he's South African. But yeah, I think it will maybe move and transcend from the current political class to something different. There's a guy, Elliot Wise, who's been on my podcast, and he's really pushing now to create content about, it's a version of Make Britain Great Again.
Okay.
But he's Make Britain More Traditional Again is what he's calling for. And I don't know if Elliot is the figurehead, but people like him, successful in entrepreneurship, a lovely family, good values, into his health and fitness. These are the people that I would rather represent me than some of these absolute no-name freaks.
So disconnected from...
disconnected, Dale.
The general practices of what was a test of a good character. You know what I mean? Like the health and fitness is a crazy one. It should be a foundational pillar in everyone's core beliefs, something that they do for themselves. Are they showing up for themselves, the habits that they're having and all that sort of stuff? So would you ever run? Would you ever get into politics more than where you're at now?
You know, my degree at Glasgow University is a master's in politics, and they told us on like day 2 that 33% of the people that do this course go into some sort of political representation. So 2/3 don't. And of that 33%, the description of politics is very broad.
Yeah.
You could be the marketing manager on the campaign for an MP. You could be the PA for a councillor. You could be somebody that gave out leaflets on the street for somebody that's standing, or a referendum for like the EU or Scottish independence, something like that. You could give out leaflets, and that counts as going into politics.
Yep.
So most people that do that degree do not go into politics, and it doesn't qualify you to go into politics in any shape or form. It just gives you an understanding of like political theory and where it's come from and international relations, which was valuable for me to understand what's going on in the world. But do I have an interest in standing politically? Not at this moment in time. But if a political party is a viable vehicle for us to push back and have that sort of thing, then maybe. But I also think that the best politicians that we're going to have in the future are going to be those that don't need the money from the political system, because they're actually not that well paid. People lose their mind when you hear this, but like an MP salary and the Prime Minister's salary isn't enough to be as senior and make the decisions they make. If they were at a private company, they would be paid 2 to 5x times that, and you'd be like, oh, it's a fair salary because they're in a high position of power. Whereas MPs are paid well for the average person, but not well for like the level of power they've got. So I think the best politicians should come from like a business background where they're like, the salary's incidental. There's a guy called Rupert Lowe who's a Reform MP. He donates his salary monthly to a charity of his choice each month, or a charity of his constituents' choice each month, which is great. And so he doesn't need it. So he's not compromised to be like, oh, by the way, I know you're on 80 grand a year, but we're going to give you a bung to try and get this legislation through Parliament. He's like, nah, fuck that. I don't need that. I'm going to keep doing what I want to do. That's the type of politicians that we want. So maybe if I end up in a financial position where I can't be compromised, then maybe I'll do it.
So maybe 2030, 2035, maybe we'll see a Campbell party created. That would be the next organisation.
I would be part of a party rather than my own party.
Oh, would you? Okay.
Yeah. As long as the leadership was in alignment with me.
The way guests coming on your podcast, you might have the kind of backing and investment.
We could build a cabinet, couldn't we? We could have a good team.
On that subject, what would you say is like one of your most, I guess, unpopular opinions that you find yourself having to like defend yourself on?
I don't know if I have to defend myself on and I don't know how unpopular it would be with the general public, but with the political class, I would like capital punishment. So if you murder or are found guilty of like a serious sexual crime or like a offence with children, I would introduce the death penalty again.
That was one of the arguments I had to either be pro or against back in high school. I remember doing all the research and what states had done it, not. I actually remember one of the biggest arguments against is making sure they get the right sentence. So does that, like, even with that, you'd still bring that in play? Like when you look at the justice system?
Yeah, as in like if people were corrupt or made a mistake.
Yep.
Gosh, that's frightening, isn't it? But you have death row for years and years and years, don't you? But there's so many cases that are cut and dry, albeit it's a moral dilemma, isn't it? I think I'm in favour of it. One, as a deterrent, and two, if you've committed like a truly heinous crime, I think you should pay the ultimate penalty. And I don't think the state should pay for them to sit in jail for the rest of their life. And again, even like if we wind back from capital punishment, life should mean life. Yeah. There's people getting like 25 years for the most heinous crimes.
Absolutely crazy.
You see, the Southport killer might not even stay in jail all his life. The wee guy that killed those wee girls at Taylor Swift Compton. That blows my mind. That is utterly insane. That he's a monster. Eviscerate him. Like again, that's me talking with anger, but in my calm, rational mind, I do believe in capital punishment.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm not against it either, especially in the UK where we have CCTV everywhere. I think obviously in some states like not well developed and that sort of stuff, but you're right. Like the most severe punishment for what you end up doing is 25 years to life or whatever. It's crazy.
And crazy. How much does that cost? And that person is, if they've done something that bad, how likely are they to be rehabilitated to change?
Do you believe in a second chance?
Absolutely. But sometimes what somebody's done as the first chance is so unforgivable that we just need to move on. Yeah.
Right. So to kind of wrap up then, so kind of dove through your story and all that sort of stuff. What's kind of next for you? What's like some of the big exciting things coming up that you're looking forward to or pursuing?
I'm pursuing the sales coaching. So Q1 of this year has been the most clients I've ever worked with in that space. So 15 one-to-one and then 5 separate as businesses. That will continue to grow, and I'll need to continue to find the bandwidth from other areas to allow it to do so, to the extent that by November next year I wanted to be in a position where I can potentially go full-time with it, which would be amazing and not something that I take lightly, because I want to come from a place of abundance where I've had another really good summer in my day job, I've had another really good year of revenue, I've had another really good year of remuneration for me, and I've enjoyed working on big projects and big wins. But that would be huge for me. I want to continue to make sure that I build in time for enjoyment as well. So I want to go to Mallorca this summer. I want to go to Ibiza again. I'll go to Dubai again next winter. Those holidays differ. I think Mallorca I can do a little bit of work and a little bit of play. Ibiza, it'll be full play and just completely switch off. And then Dubai is pretty much a working holiday, but it's working in all the ways that are really cool. Like even the gym sessions I do out there, I'm training with like a friend or somebody I'm wanting to connect with. We're outdoors on the rooftop at TKMA, or we're in Benus or Oxygen. You're in like the best gyms in the world. It feels like play, but it's work or it's networking.
Yeah, I think that's the desire for entrepreneurs. I think that's the desire for people to quit the 9 to 5 and that sort of stuff. Because there is elements of business development, whatever you want to call it, that feels like play. Not all of it, but there is those. That's the cool ones.
Yeah, those would be up there. So push the sales coaching as hard as I can and really get incredible results with people I'm working with and validate the offering that I've got for that market and continue to develop what that offering looks like. Because at the moment it's been a lot of workshops, one-to-one calls. I want to have something that's a bit more evergreen that allows people a bit more of an entry level price to it, where it's a video course with a bit of a cohort and then the one-to-one stuff. That would be amazing. I want to continue to have the fun stuff as well, continue to stay in great shape and look after myself. I had considered doing a high rocks, but I got a really bad niggle in my piriformis, which is like between my glute and my hamstring.
Quite common, actually.
I was getting sciatica
down
the back of my leg.
What it does.
Because I'm really strong in planes of motion. So like put me in a leg press, put me in a bench, put me on a shoulder press, put me in a lat pull down or a pull up.
Yeah, bilateral.
Really strong.
Yeah. But
going from 3 minutes on a ski to running on the air erg to doing burpees to doing wall balls, I just couldn't move the way I need to do. But mentally, I'm willing to push myself.
I was going to say, it's reps. You need to start with the reps.
I remember
even more.
Yeah, I ran a 5K in like just over 21 minutes, and somebody was like, "That's quite quick for somebody that doesn't run." I'm like, I just ran.
Just ran.
I'm quite light. I'm quite efficient. So I was like, I'll just run. And like the first kilometer, I didn't run fast because I was warming up. So I was like, I'm gonna do a warm up, and I reckon like if I do this, I'm like 3-4 weeks out, I can go like a 20. Oh yeah, so 20. and it was all possible because if you're gonna do something, do it well. But that's on the back burner. So training, sales coaching, have fun this summer. Make sure I enjoy myself, including the holidays that I go on. Play plenty of golf and be social as well. I'm trying to date more intentionally as well. So the last girl I dated, we were quite serious, but it didn't quite work out from my side of things entirely. Take the responsibility for that. And at 32, like I want to be spending time with somebody that I can see a long-term future with, and doing that really, really consciously as well, and not just chasing the girl that I think's really, really hot or really pretty, or that follows me back on Instagram, and I'm like, oh, I need to go and I want to go on a date with her. Dating somebody that's more of a life partner.
Yeah. A question I had for you is, what's something that's maybe missing from your life just now? Is that, would you say that's what comes to mind? Or?
I think so. Yeah, I think so. I live a really full, enjoyable, quite wholesome life. Like, I'm not hedonically chasing like really naughty shit. I'm not really that guy. And when I have been dating somebody stably, I feel like it definitely helps other areas as well. Even like, I joke about this from like an admin perspective. See, when you're talking to like 3 or 4 different girls on like Hinge and Instagram, that's not good for your time management, and it's not good for who you are as a person either, because you're having to like slip in and out of like silly characters and stuff like that as well. Whereas when you're with somebody that you really like, you can just be yourself.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that would be something that I wholeheartedly admit that I would benefit from. But again, come from a place of abundance where that person needs to add to your life and you need to add to their life, and you're not doing things from like I need a bird. I've never been like that ever. But having somebody that you both have a level of healthy dependence on each other would be great.
What's the hardest thing about dating in your 30s compared to your 20s?
Not much different. I actually feel like I attract much better girls now, because I'm more mature. I'm more sure of who I am. I've got more of the trappings of being a supportive partner as well, in terms of like, I'm more than happy to go to nice restaurants, go nice holidays, be a supportive figure. Whereas I think when you're in your early 20s, like you
have 2 for 1 cinema dates. That
exactly,
was mine.
Exactly. But that's also great, because you break down the barriers of like who's actually interested in you, or who's interested in like what you can provide for them, which is a bit of a dirty thing, isn't it? But again, evolutionary, we do look for somebody that's gone the trajectory. So even though you were 2 for 1 cinema dates, they knew that in a couple of years' time, like, oh, he's going to be able to afford a house, or he's going to have a good business, he's a good guy. What else differs? I don't know. I think it maybe differs as a guy to a girl, because I'm not in a rush to have kids. Touch wood, biologically, I feel like I'm going to be okay for the foreseeable. Whereas I think if you're in your 30s as a woman, there's a bit more of a biological imperative for you to settle quicker. In fact, the last girl I dated was 29, and when it became apparent it wasn't going to be a long-term thing for me, I called it very quick, because we'd spoken really openly about the fact that we wanted kids. And as soon as I decided that we weren't going to be together, then you pull that very, very quick, because you know that the next guy she dates might be the guy that gives her that, and if I'm not going to, then you're not going to waste her time.
Yeah, interesting. Well, it would be good to see when we circle back round. So I want to get you on for the 300th episode, and we'll talk more about podcasting, that sort of stuff. One kind of final, I guess, I kind of had this chapter of what I want to start doing with guests is like either a final mic drop, or maybe like a letter to your younger self. What would be something that you have a think about, or the younger version of Colin? Like, because I bet you when he was sitting doing those journalism for the rugby and that, he's like, I'm going to be selling furniture in Ibiza potentially when I'm older. I bet he did not think that's where your life would end up being. What would be the advice that you give to them?
I think I would advise him to do things wholeheartedly when he turns his hand to it, and go narrow and deep and build a skill set like I have done, that's enabled me to, when I apply myself in particular areas, see relative progress, success and fulfillment from it. Make sure that I don't dwell on the opinions of others or do things for validation from other people. Do them for yourself and who you are and what you stand for, and make sure that you remain intrinsically motivated, which is a big value of mine. Like, there's podcasts that I've created that I'm really proud of that have done a lot less downloads than other ones, but I'm happy with it because I enjoyed the conversation. I researched it well. The guest came across really well, and the people that did listen got something from it. Whereas if it didn't get 10,000 plays, I'm like, oh no, that's not the be all and the end all. So remain intrinsically motivated, Colin. Do the things that you said you were going to do when you said you were going to do them, because more often than not, I am an action taker, but there's a few things, like some of the things that I need to offer around the sales coaching offer, that I haven't done the work on because I've been too busy. I delayed starting the podcast by 6-7 months. I regret that, because the best time to start was yesterday. The next best time to start is today. And I'm a big believer in that. So I would encourage a younger Colin to take action sooner on the things that are calling your name to do so, because you're going to be capable of doing them. You just need to start, and then you get the chance to get better.
I like that. Any like desired dream guests that you would love to sit down with?
Jordan Peterson.
I was going to say Jordan Peterson must be up there.
He's up there. I'd love a round 2 with Chris Williamson to recap on everything that he's accomplished and all his different perspectives that he shares. Who else would I like to speak to? Jamie Alderton was really big. Grenade J was known as back in 2016, 2017. He was big on my self-development journey. The fact that I've spoken to his co-host Dan Meredith twice in the podcast was really formative for me, because his book How to Be Fucking Awesome was one of the first self-development books that I read and was like,
is it? Right, okay.
Oh, wow, I really get this. I really get this. I really, really benefit from it. Who else would be up there?
What about politicians? Would you ever sit down? Would you love to be the Joe Rogan type of like?
I'm not that.
Nah.
Maybe some politicians that I show more of an interest in the next couple of years, but there's none that I'm immediately like, I'd love to speak to him or get into a debate with them.
Would you ever host a debate? Not just with politicians, but with two opposing values. I feel you'd be quite a good.
Did you watch the Daniel Priestley versus Gary Economics debate on Down
No, I haven't.
So they're both really powerful speakers. Daniel Priestley is much more knowledgeable. Gary's a lot more rhetoric, albeit he didn't come across his best on that one because he was quite shouty, quite angry. But Stephen Bartlett chaired the debate, and it was really hard to chair. Really hard to chair. So I'm not sure what the format needs to look like.
Very hard
for that to be
set, I would imagine.
So hard,
especially
so hard.
Different personalities.
So I've not done it. Do you know what? Maybe I would do a couple and not release them until I found out how to do that. Do some practice. Get a couple of friends around that disagree on some matter and be like, right, guys, we're going to debate this, and I'll just host it and see how it goes. But then you also need to be careful that you don't have an existing bias. So Daniel Priestley versus Gary Economics. I wanted Daniel to win. I've had him on my show. I agree more with his views on taxation and entrepreneurship and business and personal accountability. Whereas Gary's a bit more of a socialist, and I'm a bit like, no, I don't want him to win. So I would have to be very careful. Whoever I sat down with, I'm like, I don't want them to lose.
You should bring like David on some big transformational program, somebody who hates transformations, like absolutely hates them, just go, right, there you go, unload, see what happens.
I'd have to back D-Hat, wouldn't I?
I know. Or better yet, just side with the other person to
wind them up.
To piss them off and wind them up. Right, perfectly. Look, an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for your time. For people that are looking to find you and all that sort of stuff, I'll leave a link in the show notes. More specifically for sales stuff, though, our books, what does that look like then in your world just now?
Yeah, so inquire over DM on Instagram or on LinkedIn, which is Colin T. Campbell, or you can email me, colin@colcambro.com, and we can chat about what it is you're looking for help with.
Cool. I'll leave a link to the show notes and everything below, but thank you very much for your time. It's been good to dive into your story, and we'll have you back on very soon for the episode 300, talking more specifically about podcasting and all that good stuff. So thanks again, mate.
Dale, thanks for having me. My pleasure.